The video game market crashes. Coinop is on the skids. And the home computer competition heats up. These stories and so much more as the year of the crash concludes on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time 40, 30, and well, that's it. Nowadays, years to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl. I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Wouter. Welcome back, Wouter.
Hi, Carl.
So, let's get a quick rundown of what you've been up to since you were last here.
Ooh, it's been a while since I've been here on the show, but I'm also doing another podcast nowadays, and that's New Game Old Flame podcast, and that's a podcast about new games on retro systems. So basically homebrew games, which is quite fun to do. And I'm invited to be a regular co-host now, so yeah, you'll be hearing me probably twice a month or something now.
Cool.
If you like it or not.
So what was the last thing you played on there?
Yeah, I've been playing a Nescape. That will be on the next show now, and that's escape room game on the
NES.
On the NES, and yeah, it's bloody hard, but it was really fun to play with my wife, which is really good at puzzles. So it has like an hour time limit or something, but we had to start over like 4 times before we could finish it. There was one sliding puzzle in that game, which is, I don't know, I can't do sliding puzzles. It's just breaking my brains. So it took the first time to finish that one. It took us the whole hour to finish
a sliding puzzle.
Okay,
yeah, you guys, yeah. Okay, this is not a glowing endorsement for the podcast right now, but then again, watching people flail around not know what to do is kind of what makes the 7 Minutes in Heaven segment what it is. So, okay, but I'll put that link in the show notes. We have a lot of show today, so we kind of needed to be moving through. Now, today we're going to be talking primarily about December of 1982. For those who have listened to our 2-part special episodes on the crash, this is, of course, the month the crash starts. I'm not going to retread all the elements of that. Please go back and check out those group discussions. We went over everything in great detail over several hours. But we will be going over sort of a brief timeline of what happened in December, at least as it was reported in newspapers of the time. And we'll talk more about that when we get to it. But before we can do that, of course, everybody remember, subscribe, give us a like, do something, if you're enjoying this. I greatly appreciate it. Subscribe, blah, 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 blah. Support us on Patreon. $1 a month gets you early access to stuff. We got a great discussion between 2 veterans of the industry on the classic DirectX versus OpenGL debate of yesteryear. Good stuff. So, that being said, before we can turn on the time machine, our first goal of the month is to send our intrepid co-host into a journey, an unforgiving journey of playing a game that was reviewed in December of 1982 that they have never played before. And we had some great games lined up. We had things like Super Pac-Man, Casey's Crazy Chase, Q*bert, Real Sports Football, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Pitfall. But Oh, it's the Crash. There could only be one winner here. And of course, it was E.T. for the Atari VCS/2600. Wouter, are you ready to phone home?
Well, as ready as you can be for this game.
Excellent. Okay, then let's get to it. Welcome back, Wouter, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven with E.T. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe E.T. to somebody who's never played it before, based solely on the 7 minutes you spent with it?
A whole lot of confusion. So, what I think is happening, you're playing as E.T. It's like sort of top-down perspective. You're walking around in a world with a lot of holes, and you can fall down in those holes and get out of the holes, and that's about it. You can there's also people walking around which try to catch you and put you in jail or something, but it's so rudimentary. It's really hard to know what's going on, and there's also some kind of arrows pointing you around, but if I follow those arrows, it's not leading anywhere. So what the game is trying to say, I don't know. What the goal is of the game, I really don't know. But I enjoyed myself with this game. The just figuring out the game was the fun part, maybe, sort of, for me. But unfortunately, in those 7 minutes, I didn't figure out what to do. But somehow, it was interesting to find out what the game wanted from me or something. It's like a puzzle.
And trying to figure out what the game wanted from you is really the crux of it, because so much of it is not represented on the screen. This was kind of the problem of the VCS, just like the game Adventure, where your character, your great adventurer, was basically just a dot on the screen. It's just trying to do way too much. It's trying to be something that it just can't be. And there's a good reason why most kids tie-in games in the rest of the decade are going to just become jump and runs, because don't even bother trying to do anything else. Just make it a jump and run with the right characters. But it was a very ambitious game, and yes, there's a reason why it does not sell as well as Atari may have hoped it would.
Yeah, but it went into history with the worst game of ever or something, or the worst game ever.
Yes, it has that reputation.
Honestly, I think I played worse.
Oh, I know I've played worse. There are games that are much worse. There are those that are just purely broken, that don't even function. There are those where there's no ambition. It's just lazy. Anybody who's played Dick Tracy on the C64 knows that's a much worse game. Even by the standards of movie tie-ins, it is a much worse game. Or Line of Fire on the C64, another absolute chunk of junk. But okay, so
if this game was developed for longer, what I understand, it was made in like 2 weeks or something, which is
a little bit more, but no.
But I can make that in 2 weeks. I feels like it's quite ambitious and it does a lot. And I think if it was like in the oven for maybe 6 months or something more, maybe it could have been something. It's quite interesting game, actually.
It could have been. There's so much that they're trying to do here, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's just way too ambitious for the hardware, way too ambitious for the timetable, and ultimately is just not a design that was going to ever really, really work. But oh well. Would you recommend this game to someone who hasn't played it before?
Honestly, I played it in the emulator just by Googling ET Atari, and then you can play it in the browser. I would say just try it. Just see that it's not the worst game in gaming history or something. It's just fun to experiment with for 7 minutes at least. So yeah, try it.
Okay, there we go. Then let's go from there and move on to the Department of Corrections, where Ethan will tell me everything I got wrong in November of 1982.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan, to the Department of Corrections. So, what did I get wrong in November of 1982?
Well, we're gonna get right into it, for there was a long episode, and there were many corrections to do. But first, to the new co-host, we have the Jeff Comment. I have to roll my eyes at the thing you said about nutting. I've seen this repeatedly wherever I go online. Some immature person is like, "Oh, I don't understand that this can be a last name, so I think that it's referring to something else." You know, I know that it was a vulgar show, Carl, but there are low standards of humor, and for Jeff, I have to put that down at the bottom.
All I have to say is I'm so looking forward to the next Jeff show. It was a nice change of pace.
Yeah. But welcome, Jeff. It was nice to have you. Enthusiasm is sometimes needed in the world of the cynical, Carl.
This is true.
And speaking of cynical, Department of Corrections. Let us open the book, because we need a book for this many corrections this time, and get into it. First up, we're talking Universal Company Limited, originally founded as Universal Leasing, the company that came out with Mr. Do. You said that Universal was caught up in the crash, but it was not. It did not get disintegrated by the crash. It mainly just refocused what it was into. It went further into redemption-style games in Japan. It didn't try to be like a really big thing in the U.S. for too long. And a lot of the people who were doing the stuff in the U.S. got poached by Capcom. In fact, it was almost like a Capcom a Universal reunion at Capcom USA, as one employee remembered it.
Morici was one of them.
That was, yeah, I think it was Joe Morici who said that.
Yeah, because I originally caught
Bill
his
Cravens
name off of
went there,
a Universal story.
As did Paul Jacobs, who was another sales guy. So a lot of the executives moved from Universal to Capcom. And so they existed for quite a number of years. And they were eventually bought by another company called Aruze Corporation, but that company has now changed its name to Universal again.
Okay, so Universal in the U.S. basically reduces dramatically, if not ceases, their operations, especially in Coinop video games, and refocuses.
I think about 85 is when they stop directly importing stuff. I think they do some licensing further, but your point was that they got killed by the crash. They did not. They were actually
but they got out of this business,
the amusement style business.
Yeah.
I don't know the full story on it, but yeah, that was just a improper framing of things.
Excellent.
All right, let's do the jump back to the 62. And Carl, You called Space War the first video game. Don't do that. Don't do those things.
You know what? I'm going to stand by that one.
No.
Because
No.
unlike some people in our community, I make a strong distinction between a tech demo and a video game. And for me, a video game has to have been conceived of and developed with the purpose of it standing alone as a game.
The intentionality is a very, very bad definition to go by on something like this, but I've made this argument many, many times before, so I am not going to spur into this at the moment.
Okay.
There are other technical reasons you might try to finagle Space War as the first video game. Norbert Landsteiner has like a very technical reason that he considers Space War, but no, that is a correction. You are corrected, Carl.
Okay. Moving on.
Okay. Then you were talking in the 72 jump about Metropolis, the the simulation demonstration that IBM was running, but Metropolis actually predates IBM. It comes before the 70s. It's a program from the 60s. It evolved a lot. I can't remember the full parameters of the original. I think it was 64 or something like that. It's an extremely early game. So just to note that it predates what IBM was doing in 72.
Do you know if there's anything online that would allow you to play it nowadays?
I don't believe so.
Too bad.
But I haven't looked too deep into that, but it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. But there are a lot of resources about it.
Cool. No, I just really would like to play it. It's just one of those. It's right up my alley. So, oh well. Okay.
Yeah,
moving on.
And like I said, it was the intention of the early versions was different from the one that you were reading about in 72. But if it is truly a branch off of the original Metropolis program, which was at just one time called Metro, then it well predates it.
Gotcha.
Okay. And now the complicated thing of Atari and Syzygy. Syzygy ceased to exist, but it didn't become Atari. What happened was that people in Atari got Syzygy stock. They're the same people, but the legal entity that was the unincorporated company of Syzygy ceased to exist. Atari was a new corporation.
Gotcha. That's a very important distinction, and I know I've read that, and we've talked about it before, and it needs to at some point seep into my brain.
Okay. And you also said Computer Space was 2-player, but it is just 1-player. There was a 2-player version, but originally Computer Space 1-player.
Gotcha.
Forward to 82. Pac-Man fever is sweeping the nation, and Namco America was involved in the licensing. And even though that Bally had most of the control in terms of who they decided to license to and all that, I actually talked to someone who was at Namco America in this time. She actually still had a document sheet regarding their licensing, like the standards of licensing, stuff like you would later see with companies like Nintendo, like how to render this sort of thing. It wasn't super specific. Style sheets.
Ooh.
But not super specific, because obviously Pac-Man was rendered in a million different ways. But she did say that was the thing that Namco America specifically helped with.
Okay, that's cool. So I have to ask, did you get into the topic of Pac-Man with versus without legs?
No. She was there after after the Midway thing happened.
Gotcha. Okay.
And in Pac-Man Birth of an Icon, Tim Lapatino makes a strong case for who made the Pac-Man with legs on the side of the cabinet. Unfortunately, he passed away, but that was, yeah. I mean, in general, yeah. I'm not going to go down the specifics of the Pac-Man thing at the moment, but we will talk about GCC, who made Miss Pac-Man. GCC was not shot down in court, as you quoted, because it never went to court. They settled with Atari outside of it.
Oh, the GCC, yeah.
Yeah. You said it was shot down in court, and it was not.
Okay. No, but they did lose some preliminary hearing. I remember. I want to say they lost some kind of initial hearing.
Yeah, I need to relook into the. Yeah,
they didn't lose the case per se, but there was some decision by the court which basically just, it essentially made it, or at least I've got that stuck in my brain. I don't want to go on the record. I'll try to look it up and figure it out.
Well, it's already recorded, Carl, so there you go.
Well, no, this is why I have my master document where I can look things like this up again and can tell you exactly which episode it was on. And with the wonders of time-lapse, let's see, master article list, GCC. Atari got an injunction against them.
Okay.
Which prevented them from selling, and this we reported on in the August 81 episode. So while they didn't lose the court case, that injunction basically meant no more money coming in, and the judge already sides with Atari, so you're basically screwed if you do go to trial. So yeah, they lost in court. For all practical intents and purposes.
And the way the GCC people put it is like Atari never had a chance, and they were spending too much money pulling the people out. I remember I argued with Tim about this when he was doing the Pac-Man book. But another thing related to GCC, you said Miss Pac-Man was 1981. It came out in 1982.
What? Yeah, I got that year wrong. My bad.
It was early 82. But it's
that's probably
not
why.
81.
Well, I was just thinking it was like they waited more than a year after Pac-Man.
I mean, it wasn't done. The Crazy Otto wasn't done, so it wasn't.
That's true.
I don't think they didn't wait, but because it was still selling. The thing is that the Pac-Man cabinets were still selling, so you don't need a sequel if your product is still selling.
That's true.
Next, Go, the game of Go, the board game, which we call Go or iGo or blah, 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 blah. It is not Japanese. It is in fact Chinese.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yes. As with most things in the China obviously covers a lot of ground that used to be other countries and things. So when you say something is Chinese, you're meaning many, many different things with that.
Gotcha.
But yeah. I think it's more popular in Japan than it is in China at this point. And you were saying in the context of Atari as a term in Go, that is Japanese, but it's basically a translation of a Chinese term.
Ah, interesting. Very cool. Did not know that.
Then Gremlin was bought by Sega, did not merge.
Ah, okay. Cool.
Big difference. Then, speaking of Tandy and home consoles, I think you were making a question, why didn't Tandy try to get into home consoles? They did dedicated home consoles. In the 70s, they were actually pretty big in that. They sold lots of different Pong and adjacent consoles in that time period.
Yeah. Well, and this came up in the context of their rebranded Intellivision that they were selling. At least in 82, they were selling it.
Yeah.
And
the most wood grain thing ever to exist. I mean, people always talk about the classic Heavy Sixer by Atari, but the Tandy Vision is the most garish wood grain object that I've ever seen. I've seen all sorts of stereo players, and I've seen desks made out of wood, but the Tandy Vision is the most wood grain object.
I wonder if LGR has ever done a video about that. Because he loves his wood grain. That would just be like the holy grail.
You got it, Clint. Get on it.
Okay.
Then we go to Activision. And Carl, you were saying Activision didn't get into sports.
Yeah, I know. That was a brain fart. That was a brain fart.
Yeah, that's what they were known for at the beginning. So.
At the very beginning, yeah. I mean, by 82, they still got Decathlon coming down the pipeline, but they've branched off into, they've got River Raid and Barnstormer and Pitfall and all those games.
Laser Blast.
So, and Hero is coming as well pretty soon. So,
yeah, they changed what they were doing, but they were into sports at one time, so.
Yeah, that's true.
Then, another legal kerfluffle. Atari did not lose in court to Sierra. And you could go look on your thing. As far as I remember, again, this was not something that actually went all the way. They may have lost, it might have been another preliminary injunction thing and they were not successful, but that does not necessarily mean a loss in that sense.
Well, Atari does win a preliminary injunction originally. But then Sierra does get a decision from the court. And this is a very famous one. This is where Ken Williams' famous quote about, I don't think we infringed, but it would be terrible if this decision did lead other people to copy my software in the future. He does win in court. There is a judge's decision. Now, whether or not it was a final decision on the merits of the case, I'm not going to put my hand in fire, but there is a court decision which essentially says they're okay on a game that's clearly just a ripoff of Pac-Man. Jawbreaker's more complex than that, at least on the Apple II version. But
it's a ripoff of Ladybug.
It's a ripoff of Ladybug, yes. But there is a court decision that helps Sierra in this case. That one I'm going to stick by. There is a court decision. Final judgment on the merits of the case is quite often in these cases not the court decision that's going to have the weight, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You have to be a little bit opener with your definition there.
Sure, and then, Mr. Legal...
The lawyer's telling you, trust me, the injunction is usually the decision. But, that's another issue. Not saying always.
Another legal case, the Atari suit against Magic. It was not dropped because Magic went out of business. Magic went out of business in 85. So even if they were continuing that, I'm sure it got dropped at some point and it was never reported and all that. Even if they were at that point, it would have stopped at the point they got out of home consoles, because why would they continue that? So.
Exactly. No money to be had. Plus, Atari had its own problems. I don't think they were really going to be spending a lot of money on lawyer fees at that point.
They did, but yeah, that another thing entirely. Next, you were talking about mini computers, and your rationale behind the mini computer thing is a little bit twisted. You had this kind of idea that mini computers didn't run servers, I think was what you were trying to get at. You were saying that, mainframes ran servers, but mini computers ran most of the servers. Most of the things that people were pointing into, the Source and CompuServe, those were run off mini computers, not IBM mainframes.
To be honest with you, I cannot remember what this was even about.
I think you were talking about online services in some regard, and then you're talking about how, now that the IBM has the PC, there's no room for the mini computer anymore, because you don't need a computer with that kind of power that's that big, and yeah.
Okay, if I said that, I knew mini computers were still running servers and things like that. I mean, just recently had the interview with. Oh, too many interviews. My brain is is turning to mush at this point. And this was date modified. Robert Kniskern who was basically the tech guy running an online server, and he was using mini computers for it in the late 70s, early 80s, an online gaming system. So yeah. No, if I said that, then yes, I misspoke. That is wrong.
The mini computers get hollowed out once you have the workstations, which is something that you'll get to later in the 80s when they start to become a real thing. Then the creators of Elite, David Braben and Ian Bell.
Yes, thank you. I keep forgetting Ian Bell, but he's extremely important in the development of that game.
Yeah, they were total co-authors. You can't disentangle one from the other.
No.
Even though David Braben is more famous, he's never tried to snatch that credit away.
No.
Braben seems like a good guy. Then another British microcomputer thing. Shadowfax is not Gandalf's horse. Shadowfax is the king of the horses. He just helps Gandalf.
Gotcha. See, that was one of those little tidbits that is... I knew the name from Lord of the Rings, but I could not... I guess, I got it confused.
Resident fantasy nerd here to help correct you good, Carl.
Does Gandalf ever ride Shadowfax in the book? Okay, that's why.
Yeah, but he is not his horse.
Gotcha.
Shadowfax is his own horse.
Shadowfax don't play like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And lastly of all, Pinball Construction Set actually was released by Bill Budge's company, Budgeco, before it was released by Electronic Arts.
Okay. Yeah,
for a couple months.
I wasn't sure on that. I wasn't sure on that anymore.
Yeah.
So that was before it got that really cool EA cover with the two hands.
The Budgeco art is kind of fun and interesting. It's got like these aren't connects because I don't think those existed back then, but basically like that, like showing you that you're putting the pieces together on the boards. So that one's kind of cool, but yeah, obviously the EA one is way more album arty.
Oh yeah, that's iconic. It's most people don't even know what it's from, but a lot of people know that image.
Mm. But that is November of 1982. We have shut our binders closed, and we can move on with our merry lives. I'm going to have a drink.
Thank you again, as always, for your service, Ethan.
Wow, Ethan, that was a lot of corrections.
Yeah, lots of little things. What can I say? The episode kind of took a while to get through, but it's all good. We made it. And now let's make some more mistakes. So we're going to turn on the time machine before we can go to December of 1982. We've got to first go to December of 1962. No sound effect. So, Wouter, what's our first headline?
Arthur C. Clarke predicts networked AI wiping us out.
An amazing essay by Arthur C. Clarke in the New York Times describes his vision of the future, where satellite-based computer networks make intelligent machines possible, which will someday replace us as the dominant species on the planet. His predictions of the utility of such networks for information sharing and changing the way that we live is quite prescient, although we have yet to reach the point where machines take over all manual labor tasks.
So he wrote Terminator 2.
In a way, yes. I mean, he literally says in there, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, that, we are in the process of building our replacements. And, it's pretty cool because he's predicting, these networks of information, access to basically anything we want, but he also has the very typical 1960s sci-fi or view that little automated robots are going to take over all the manual tasks. People won't have to dig ditches anymore or all this other stuff. It's all going to be done by automated computers, which, of course, hasn't happened. but it's a really, really cool piece. I put a link in the show notes. I do believe you have to be a New York Times subscriber to read it, but if you guys can get access to it, it's an amazing piece, really, really worth reading.
Sounds fun. I always like those science fictions which are like based on science.
Exactly. But yeah, I just thought it was a cool thing considering, how old the story is, that gives us a good insight into where a great mind like Arthur C. Clarke is already at this point.
Nice.
But, okay, moving on because we have so much to cover today. Yeah. Moving forward 10 years, December of 72. What's our first headline?
Final Apollo mission lands on the moon.
The last Apollo mission, Apollo 17, lands on the moon. While it is known at the time that this is the final manned mission to our satellite, few are seeing it as an end of such flights for over 50 years.
It never happened, right?
Yeah, of course it never happened. I mean, so all the soundstage. Oh, Jesus Christ. Those morons. Oh, well.
Let's not continue that.
Yeah. But don't worry. You know that it was fake, despite the fact that they put a chip in your brain. Okay. So it's the last mission. I mean, at the time, a lot of people are talking about, what will be next and so forth. And the articles are kind of all over the place about, what will be the future of space flight travel and so on. And, it's kind of sad that looking back 50 years later, nobody else has gone back to the moon. That
Yeah, but why would you?
Well, this is the question. I mean, we went there, maybe jumping off point to something else. Maybe, that's the question. Why would you go? It's a lonely.
It's just a lot of wasted money to go there, and also a lot of risk.
Yeah, but I mean, when you think of all the scientific developments that came out of the project, the computer tech that was developed, things like Velcro, for example. Well, I don't know if that's already, it's got to be around at this point. There's a lot of technology that comes out of this, a lot of research that comes out of this. Even if the end result of being on the moon itself was relatively pointless, what that achieved as far as advancing other areas of technology that wouldn't have been advanced without that kind of government support, without that kind of well-defined mission, really, we would have been poorer for it. And so this
but we need
that
on-world problems right now, which can also can bring technology forward when you try to solve that.
Yes and no. The problem is that when you have a pie in the sky thing and you start experimenting in 1,000 different directions, you're going to find stuff that if you're just concentrating on individual small problems, you're not going to be bumping in by accident into new technologies. So moving on, what's our next headline?
Laserdisc premieres.
At a Universal Studios event, MCA has shown off DiscoVision, its Laserdisc system, the first of its kind. They predict discs will sell for about $10 each, so comparable to a record album.
Well, I didn't know Laserdisc was that old.
Laserdisc is that old. I mean, it was in development for quite a while. At this point, they're still also developing the vinyl record video disc over at RCA, which, we've talked about on the show before. That's going to take a few more years to be released. But, Laserdisc is out, and, it's not going to cost $10 each for the movies. They're going to be considerably more expensive than that. Universal Studios owns it, so in theory they've got a backlog of movies to fall back on, but the adoption of this technology is going to take quite a while, and it never really catches on as a mass medium. The video cassettes are already in different permutations on the market or in development. And those are obviously going to be the winners of this generation of technology. So, but, okay, enough with the 60 and 50 years. We're here for the 40-year jump. We're here for the crash. Let's turn on the time machine and head back to December of 1982.
Knowledge is 1982.
Electronic video games.
Entertainment business has been generally lackluster.
There is so much money to be made.
Welcome to December of 1982. Now, before we get to our first headline, I always give the little warning that we're always using cover dates of magazines and newspapers, and obviously the events always happen at some point before those dates because of publication times and how long it takes before the news gets out, blah, blah, blah. Because of the big events surrounding the crash, the Warner Communications announcing that they're not going to miss that they're going to miss their targets and all this stuff, all the things that we discussed in the 2-part crash episodes. This is where we do really have a big conflict, if you will, or difference between what is being published this month in the newspapers, which are a quasi real-time reporting on the evolution of the crash, versus the magazines, which are all a month or so behind, with a few exceptions like some of the weekly or bi-weekly trade magazines, which can start to already report on these events without a large editorial delay. So what we're going to do this month, which is different from every other episode we've done, we're going to start off first with a brief overview of a timeline of news articles, primarily from the New York Times, in chronological order. Remember, everybody, all the sources are in the show notes, so you can always go and check these out yourself. Just to give a quick timeline of what gets reported in the New York Times and a couple other publications in the month of December in real time as the crash is happening. And then we're going to go back and look at more general news stories in regular magazines and trade publications concerning other areas. But the crash-specific stuff we're going to do at the top as a quick timeline of headlines before going back to our regular stuff. So, with that caveat there, Wouter, what's our first headline?
Atari secures Destron licenses.
The New York Times reports on December 3rd that Atari has signed a deal with Destron Incorporated to license their arcade properties for release on home consoles.
So what's Destron?
Destron is a subsidiary of a company called GDI, and they've been in bankruptcy proceedings since at least September. That's as far back as I could find this. And they've only produced one arcade game so far, and they've licensed one other one from IRA. So they have no real output of any actual value. But the fact that the New York Times is reporting on this on December 3rd, I would interpret as a sign of Atari, and we've talked about this in previous months, and we also talked about this really, really big in the Crash episode. Atari Coinop hasn't really been hitting any major hits for a while. The last year has been all but bereft of major hits. Yeah, okay, a couple of things, Tempest and so forth, but they've really hit a dry patch, while other companies like Nintendo have really been stepping up to the plate, coming up with innovative game concepts that are stealing their thunder. And they're signing a deal with this company, Destron, that has no games to fall back on. They're already in bankruptcy procedures. I have no idea what they're hoping to get here.
They're just struggling already. They want to get content out or something. They want to find something.
they're grabbing at straws.
Yeah.
That's what this story is telling me at the beginning of the month. But, okay.
Let's continue on.
Yes.
Video game update newsletter bullish on CES.
While we can't pinpoint the exact publication date, this month's video game update newsletter starts off with big anticipation for CES, and apparently many manufacturers have given the newsletter exclusive inside scoops that they will publish on January 6th in their January newsletter, which will coincide with the public announcement of new games being made at CES. 1983 promises to be a great year for video games.
So there was still hope at this moment of time.
Well, and that's the thing. So if their next issue is January 6th, my guess is that this newsletter comes out sometime early in December. So this is pre-crash. Mm-hmm. And everything is looking bullish, at least for certain people. We've talked in the past here on the show how the short sellers on Wall Street have already basically predicted the crash. But here we now have these guys be like, oh yeah, there's so much new product coming down the pipeline. We're going to give you the news as soon as we can at early January, blah, 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 blah. So this is kind of cool to just put this in a time capsule because we're moving towards the announcement.
The next story.
Yes.
Games by Apollo files for bankruptcy.
The first casualty of the crash seems to be Games by Apollo, which, according to a New York Times report from December 7th, filed for bankruptcy 2 weeks earlier. Apparently, the high cost of advertising and crowded shelves was too much for the Texas startup.
So, did they produce anything? It doesn't ring a bell.
Put some games out. Games by Apollo came in with a big splash, big marketing campaign, and they were actually a subsidiary, I believe, of a company that made educational videos. And this article talks about how and it goes into great detail actually. The skyrocketing advertising expenditures in the video game space with an estimated $100 million in ad spend for the year, just alone on TV ads, is expected.
That's a lot.
Well, you have to multiply this by basically 5 to get inflation-adjusted numbers.
Crazy.
It's crazy. And the increasing popularity of big movie licenses, like E.T., is also expected to be a new growing source of revenue for the industry. But those licenses cost a lot of money, which also means the smaller players just can't keep up.
Yeah.
And Games by Apollo is one of these companies that, like so many of the little ones, they're still in the mindset, well, if I do a shooter game, that'll bring in the money. And like we just said with the previous story, games like Donkey Kong, where it's not about shooting anymore. Now you actually have characters on the screen that are recognizable as characters, that are interacting with one another in more complex ways, like, jumping over barrels, grabbing a hammer, and so on and so forth.
Even sort of story, stuff like that.
Exactly. So these more complex games are now becoming what people are expecting, and Games by Apollo just doesn't really have anything in there. I don't have a complete list of the games that they released memorized off the top of my head, but it's mostly crap.
Yeah, they're basically stuck in the past.
Well, that's the thing. They're coming into it. They're learning this very, very complex hardware because the 2600 is extremely hard to program for. So they're still just learning how to figure it out at a time when the people who have already been in it for a couple of years, like the former Atari engineers and so forth, can come up with new innovative ideas like Pitfall and just wipe them out. There's no second place or a second tier software market at this point. So Games by Apollo is out even before the crash takes place.
Well, maybe they're lucky. Warner announces earnings guidance adjustment.
Warner Communications has announced that their previous earnings guidance will be adjusted down. This is a report from December 9th. This led to a massive stock drop, resulting in the New York Stock Exchange halting trading of the stock. By the time of the stop, it had dropped $1.75 to just under $52 a share. Perry Odak, the president of the home games division, who had only taken the newly created position, would be fired just after trading, and some block traders reported selling upwards of 1 million shares of Warner stock at just $40 a share in after-hours trading.
Well, this is going fast.
This is going very, very fast. So it drops $1.75 to $52. So we're talking about a stock that was $53. Drops $1. So we're already talking a 2% drop. And then in after hours trading, it drops another, 20%?
Yeah.
This is insane. It's more than 20% drop in after hours trading. And so this is not good. Now, we talked about this in the special, of course, and I'm going to keep repeating that. I'm sorry for anybody who's already listened to it. If you haven't listened to it yet, why haven't you listened to it yet? The main problem is Atari's loss of market share, coupled, as the New York Times article notes, by underperformance by games such as E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark. At the time of publishing, Atari only has one game in the Billboard Top 5, and that's Berserk at number 4. And Berserk was a license that they got from somebody else. So it's a Coinop conversion that they didn't make themselves. Now, all the major players saw their stocks drop, most significantly, and most of them significantly more than Warner. But they didn't get halted. Only Warner gets mentioned as halted here. Mattel, Coleco, Commodore, and Texas Instruments all saw significant sell-offs.
So these were probably even worse off.
Well, they're worse off. Remember, they stop it after the $1.75. So the after-hours trading isn't being counted here as a comparison.
Okay.
So this is where, and remember, this is an article that's being released in the December 9th issue. The announcement happens on the 8th.
Oh, wow. So
it's
really hot news.
Well, and this is why. So December 9th, you probably had a deadline to get the story in by maybe 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night at the latest. And then you've got, the next day this is happening. Then we'll see what comes in the following days. But yeah, so anybody who's even remotely close to the video game business, and Commodore and TI aren't really in that business, but they are impacted because, for example, Commodore is one of the major suppliers through MOS Technologies of 6502 chips, which are powering things like the Atari 2600. So there is, there are all these tentacles hitting different areas. And people are also worried, well, if video games are going to collapse, maybe home computers will collapse. It's, this general, let's get out of the tech sector, or at least the home tech sector. Okay, but moving on.
Yeah.
Also from
Atari,
the same day.
Atari sues Coleco over Module 1.
Yeah, so this is happening the same day. We talked last month about Coleco's expansion module 1 for the ColecoVision, which would allow the system to play VCS cartridges. Atari has filed a $350 million lawsuit against Coleco, charging patent infringement, and Coleco duly countersued for $500 million for restraint of trade and stated that they violated no valid patents.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, and maybe they should be busy with other stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, Atari wants to sort of everybody at this point has announced some add-on for their console, including Atari themselves for the new 5200, some add-on that will let you play all the 2600 games. And whether or not these are violating a patent or not, I honestly don't know how all these cases get resolved. We'll have to see how that develops in the future. But, everybody wants a piece of the 2600 market. Everybody wants to be able to play VCS cartridges because there's just so many of them on the market. And Atari, of course, would like it if they're the sole provider of the hardware for that. But, it's very old hardware at this point. It's very rudimentary hardware at this point. It's not difficult to reverse engineer, just like they could with the cartridges.
Also, in about a month, nobody wants them anymore. So,
the 2600 is still going to now, and let's get one thing very straight here. The players still want to play the games. They will sell more software than ever this year. It's just that there's way too much product in the pipeline. Because the last couple of years, and again, if I was going to summarize our Crash episodes as briefly as possible, the previous 2 years, production couldn't keep up with demand. Now production has been boosted. They can keep up with demand, but because the retailers were all worried that they were going to order 100 and only get 50, they ordered 200.
Oh, wow.
Expecting to get 100. And instead they got 200, and the market was only there for 50. And this is the problem. In a nutshell. There's other problems. There's lots of other problems. But that's the big problem in a nutshell.
So the retailers had the biggest problem. That's what you're saying.
The retailers are stuck with a whole bunch of product, and there's going to be schemes for trying to get rid of that product, but it's going to take years for that product to get out of the system. And those are going to be the years where it's very hard to sell new games because there's so many games still sitting on shelves. And by the time all that stuff's out of the system, that's just the moment when Nintendo shows up with the NES. So they come in just as the market is like, hey, you know what? We've got empty space here for video games again. And I'm oversimplifying dramatically. I know that. We'll get into more of those details when we get there, but we're still a couple years away from that. Again, go back and listen. We have two wonderful special episodes. We got great guests on there. It's good times. Okay, next.
Atari stock plummets further.
So now we're on December 10th, the next day. On December 9th, Atari stock fell to just over $35 a share as their meager fourth quarter earnings estimate rattles the market.
So stock. What was the stock before? Because it says 35.
So on December 8th, when they made the announcement, the stock was going for $53.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of difference.
Now, on December 9th, it's down to $35 a share. That is a big freaking drop. Okay?
In one day, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and remember, they had stopped trading. Now this happened. So Warner expects at this point that fourth quarter earnings will drop from $1.17 last year to just 60 cents per share this year. They're still going to be making a profit. They're only going to be making about half as much profit, but they're still going to be making a profit. Analysts had been expecting $1.80. So the share had been going up because everybody was expecting $1.80. They're now going to be making a third of what was expected, and that's why everybody's like, this is overvalued. The return on investment just isn't high enough for this level of stock price. Mattel is actually expecting a loss in the fourth quarter despite increased revenue. So this is the yearly earnings. But for the fourth quarter, Christmas time, they're actually expecting to lose money. So all the money they made at the beginning of the year, when video game sales were going gangbusters, is actually going to be, they're going to turn a loss in the fourth quarter.
That's crazy because the fourth quarter is normally the biggest for gaming, as far as I know. Yeah.
And so Mattel is being hit almost harder than everybody else just because they've been trying to compete with the 2600 with the Intellivision. The Intellivision is much more capable machine, much more powerful machine, but it's also already getting very old, looks old in comparison with the ColecoVision, and they've been doing these mail-in rebates that we've talked about the last couple months on the show, and they've been basically just murdering their profit margin. And the ad spend, all those ads they've been putting on TV with Plimpton talking about how great the Intellivision is, and they got the kid from E.T. on one of the ads, and all this stuff is just, the profit margin isn't there. Coleco also announces that they'll be showing lower fourth quarter profits than second quarter profits. So the money they made, the profit from the second quarter is going to be less than the fourth quarter. So their spring business is going to be worse than their Christmas business, even though the fourth quarter will be a massive improvement over their 9-cent per share loss the year before. So Coleco had some trouble the year before with their profit margins and stuff, but it's going to be better than the previous year, but still the fact that the spring quarter was better than the Christmas quarter just shows that too many people are fighting over the same limited budgets for games. The ad spend has just basically eaten away at the profit margins.
So they spent too much and they didn't sell as much as they should.
Exactly.
Okay, then continue on. Mattel and Warner continue decline while others begin to recover.
The initial shock from the 8th, which caused many involved directly or tangentially with the video game market to see their stocks drop, has continued into the 11th of December, with the losers including TI, Texas Instruments, and General Instruments, while Coleco, Tandy, and Commodore regained some ground.
So they're not plummeting anymore, probably.
Yeah. So when Warner made their announcement, the initial reaction seems to have been, "Oh crap! There's a fundamental problem with everybody because Atari is synonymous with video games. So maybe there's some fundamental problem with the market that we've overlooked." Now we're seeing that everybody's had a couple days to digest it. They've looked at the numbers and they're like, okay. These guys are hurt harder than others. It's really probably just a problem with Atari. And now we're going to see the stocks of some of these guys get better, like Coleco, Tandy, and Commodore, because Commodore is selling the VIC-20 like it's going out of style. Tandy and Coleco also have solid fundamentals. TI is basically just is spending way too much on rebates on the TI-99. Plus, they're mainly a part supplier, which means that all the companies that buy stuff from TI, if they're not going to buy anymore, that's going to hurt TI. So it's one of those issues now where a lot of investors are starting to figure out, okay, who's going to survive this? Who's not going to survive this?
The initial panic is gone, and now they're start thinking.
Exactly. Doesn't mean that companies like Warner aren't still going down. They're still going down.
Yeah, but rightfully so, probably.
Yeah.
But somehow Atari announces 1200 XL.
Yes. Amidst the chaos caused by their loss of market share in video games, Atari has announced their latest computer, the 64K Atari 1200 XL. This is from a report in the Wall Street Journal on December 14th. While the system RAM has been upgraded, little else differentiates the machine from its predecessor, the 800. The announcement seems to have been used as an opportunity by reporters to ask many pointed questions about Atari's video game business. According to the company, ET will be profitable. They did not expect such serious competition in '82, and they admit that at some point in the spring, their hit arcade output went dry. They hope to turn it around with 5 new arcade hits to be released in 1983.
So this announcement is maybe to calm down the investors or something?
Well, they probably already had this lined up. I doubt that they wanted to announce a brand new computer right before Christmas.
Yeah, because nobody is going to buy the old one.
Yeah, you don't want people returning the 800 that they just bought when the new price-reduced, bigger memory one is coming out. But I'm sure that they moved it up in order to I'm guessing. I don't know it for certain, but it would not be an uneducated guess to say that they've moved the announcement up a few weeks to try to stem the bleeding.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah.
Some positive story or something.
Exactly.
Okay, but more negativity about Warner. Warner's problems not limited to Atari.
While Atari may have been the tail wagging the Warner dog, the dog may have only had one good leg left. Several executives have been found guilty of bribery in a 1973 stock purchase case in which the prosecutor has publicly announced that the true culprit, Warner head of the board, Stephen J. Ross, has not been brought to justice yet. This is all coming from a report on December 19th, so 4 days after the report on the 1200. In addition to this, Warner's big investment in cable infrastructure and channels continues to make losses estimated between $30 and $40 million for 1982, despite having popular channels like Nickelodeon and MTV. Warner has agreed to sell part of its Knickerbocker toy division to Hasbro, cutting losses which in large part had to do with the company's reliance on the Dukes of Hazzard license.
Wow, there's a fire going on in the Warner's offices.
Yeah, so Warner Brothers
9 years old.
Yeah, well, a lot of these financial crime cases take a long time to go to trial. Simply because getting the documents, building the case just takes a long time in these cases because there's so much paperwork to comb through for the prosecutor's offices.
And now they're kicking Warner while he's down.
Exactly. And it just happens to be coming at this moment in time when they really don't need it. And the fact is Warner's a big company. Atari is, in theory, a relatively small portion of it, or up until a couple years before, it was a relatively small portion. But because you had, up until 82, the movie business, the theatrical movie business had been in a slump. We don't have the VHS business exploding yet the way that it will in a couple of years. We talked last month about how I believe it's Paramount is going to bring out Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan on a low price VHS tape. Low price in comparison with the normal prices for VHS tapes, to see if that's a market that you can harness. It's going to be the beginning of this whole idea of, people buying video cassettes and keeping them at home and creating a whole new market, a whole new revenue source for movies, in addition to the renewal of the Blockbuster in the theaters, which has also now brought in more money for the studios. But they've been investing in cable channels and cable infrastructure. There's a lot of money that goes into these things, and it isn't all pervasive yet. It's not like everybody in the United States has cable television yet. Mm-hmm. I still remember we got our first cable connection probably 82, 83. That was the first time we got cable TV. We didn't have it before that. And I remember having MTV for the first time.
Wow, I didn't know that MTV was that old.
Oh, yeah.
And Nickelodeon as well.
Yeah.
For me, it's like maybe in around the late 90s or something in Europe.
No. MTV Europe was already running in 92 when I moved to Europe.
Oh, okay.
Beginning of 92, it was already running. And it had been for at least a year or so. Maybe more. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But whatever the case may be, yeah. So these exclusive channels doing specialty content, they're not really turning a profit yet. They're going to, but right now it's still about building the brands, putting money in, getting more and more people who can watch. And the Knickerbocker thing is, of course, also funny because, they had the Dukes of Hazzard license, which was a gold mine for years until, and I think we talked about on the show briefly, the two main stars left in a contract dispute. And so I believe it's the 81-82 season of the show is the one where you get the cousins.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Don't tell me about that. I don't ask me the names of them, but the ratings for the show just collapsed. Just absolutely collapsed.
Yeah, that's not a good thing to have your main protagonist change.
No. And so this is why suddenly nobody wants those toys anymore. And it's also coming just at the moment when G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, those toys are coming in to replace Dukes of Hazzard as the go-to toys for boys. So so they were in all these different pies. The age of the conglomerate is slowly coming to an end. That thing that started in the late 50s, early 60s with companies getting into a bunch of different areas to sort of, hedge their bets and so forth, that's coming to an end. It's going to be companies focused on one area of business. And, we're going to see this in a bunch of companies where they're going to shed stuff. But the conglomerate age is sort of still there. We just had it with Coca-Cola buying and I know Ethan's going to kill me for this. I can't remember. One of the video game makers, and I'm not even going to say a name because I'll probably get it wrong. But they bought a video game maker for no reason whatsoever other than it's a conglomerate thing. So, yeah. Okay. Moving on. We still have so much to do.
Yeah. Atari's problems start at the head.
This is an article now from the December 19th. And it's a very lengthy one. It breaks down many of the warning signs that should have been evident going into the Christmas season at Atari. For one, the turnover of executives had been going for a while, with many claiming that Ray Kassar refused to stop micromanaging them. We also get executives like Manny Girard admitting that they were unprepared for massive returns when the policy of making buyers order for all of 1982 in October of 81 backfired because everyone ordered as if the supply restraints, aka insufficient product availability, of the previous 2 years would also happen again in 82.
Yeah, that's what you thought.
Yeah, that's just what we talked about. Yeah. And it's very cool that this is already being published this early in. It's not something that we had to dig out years later. No. It's showing up directly in the New York Times in December. So, and the fact that they made everybody order in October of 81 for all of 82.
Yeah, that's
going into a Christmas season where it was basically known you're going to have to order double to get what you want. But that also made the books at Atari look really, really good.
Yeah. Because you have a lot of nice future ahead of you.
Yeah. And so they're just not ready for it. Now, in addition to the Atari stuff, one analyst and Coleco head Arnold Greenberg talk about how Atari has begun to rely too heavily on licensed games from Japan and lawsuits to win back market share that they can't win back through their own products. Here, of course, we're talking in part about all the Pac-Man lawsuits that Atari filed, and of course, we just talked about how they're suing Coleco, aka Greenberg's company, over the Module 1 for the ColecoVision. Pole Position, their latest Smash arcade game, Atari's arcade game, is a Japanese import. So, again, this whole idea that they're relying more and more on licensing games from others. It worked great for Pac-Man and Space Invaders, but there's no internal input coming anymore. Or at least no super quality hit games coming from inside anymore. Now, Atari has teased a new consumer product codenamed Falcon. Please do not confuse this with the Falcon 030 of the Tramiel era. No other details are known, but given how flaky the company has become, hopes are not high.
A consumer product? That's a game? Or is it a console or something?
Well, it's supposed to be this hybrid telecommunications device thingamabob. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes. We don't really need to go into it here because we'll probably talk about it again when it finally gets out. When it gets canceled.
Oh, canceled. Of course.
Yeah. Or do they release a version of it? I can't remember anymore. I actually had a discussion on Discord about this, but it's several weeks ago now, and I would have to look it up, and I'm too lazy, and we have too many important things to talk about. But yeah, it's a largely irrelevant piece of history here. They're trying to say, "Oh, we're going to revolutionize the world again." It's not going to happen.
They're just trying to bring out the good news. But
remember, we've talked about this on the show over the last year. Atari has been dumping a ton of money into R&D. They've been creating some super, super innovative stuff. The only problem is that, it's not enough, and it's just, it's not going to work. I mean,
maybe also too much. Maybe it's just
it's cool that they're doing it, and we're going to see another project of theirs in a later story here today. The idea of the merging of consoles and home computers and creating, all-purpose devices, and telecommunications are coming, and video phone, which is another thing they're working on, and all this stuff is the way it's going to go. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They see basically the cell phone, if you will. This all-purpose device that can do everything. The PC I'm talking to you on right now, it's got a webcam, it's got a microphone, it can play games, it can do graphics, it can allow me to edit photos, it can send emails, all of this stuff. They kind of see it, and they're trying to position themselves as a company that can deliver that in the future. But it's all on the back of a business model that relies on them being 90% provider of the video games for consoles on the market.
Yeah,
that's just not the case anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
And it relies on them having big hit video games. They just don't have those. So
continue on the bad news. Ray Kassar caught in insider trading investigation.
Oh, yeah. Now, this is on the 24th. This is Christmas Eve's newspaper. Ray Kassar, CEO of Atari, and Dennis Groff, Executive Vice President of Atari, both sold several thousand shares of Atari stock on December 8th, the day of the fateful earnings announcement, and December 1st, respectively. Warner found out about the sale and those of several other unnamed Atari employees after conducting an audit. The information has been handed over to the SEC, which is looking into the matter.
Wow. Can they stop?
Well, Ray Kassar says that the sale had been long planned with his accountants as part of his year-end tax strategy. And this also makes sense because a lot of people get paid in part in stock. So there's tax reasons to unload that stock before the end of the year. And it's possible that, this had been previously planned. It would be extremely stupid to do it, the same day that you're announcing this. And we know that Atari internally figures this out over the Thanksgiving break. So the announcement on the 8th basically starts to bubble up around Thanksgiving is when they figure out, oh, crap, we screwed up the numbers. I don't believe anything happens to Ray Kassar because of this. Nothing comes out of this. Maybe wrong. We'll see in the news as it moves forward. But, this is just another bit of bad news on top of a bunch of bad news.
I really don't want to be in that office there at that time. Man, it's just really like being kicked while you're almost you're already on life support.
Exactly.
Okay.
Hold on, we got two more stories. Let's do let's finish this timeline.
Warner calls off Madison fund purchase.
Warner Communications had announced back in October their intention to buy the Madison Fund, a stock portfolio holding over $350 million in assets. The plan was to buy the fund with stock and debentures that could be traded for stock and liquidate the fund and use the assets as funding. With the stock dropping from over $50 to just $26, we're now down to $26.
Almost half.
The number of shares Warner would have to promise to make the deal possible is no longer tenable. And, of course, much less attractive to Madison shareholders. Yeah, this now, just put this in context. This is a story that's running on the 25th of December, so Christmas Day in the New York Times.
Yeah, and Warner already halved because you say 50 to 26, but it was 52.
Yeah, well, from over 50. From over 50 to just
20.
So at this point, we're down to $26 a share.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
50% down. That's crazy. Well.
Yeah. This is a bloodbath. That's the only nice way to say it. Now, the Madison Fund story was something that I almost reported on a few months ago when it was first hitting the news, but I didn't really see it being impacting the video game thing. But now that it's come back, I thought, okay, let's include it here, because Warner as a total company outside of the Atari division needed money. And Madison had been this fund that had invested in a couple of deals that had gone sour. So while they still had a lot of assets, a lot of stocks in the portfolio, there was a prospect that some of these were going to keep dropping in value. So it would have made sense for the holders of the Madison Fund, the stockholders of that fund, or the people owning pieces of the fund, to trade those out for a really good company stock, and Warner would then just be able to sell off all the assets, sell off all the stocks in the Madison Fund, get an immediate cash injection, this $350 million in immediate cash, to help finance operations, and the people who got the Warner stock would be happy because they'd have a stock that would be going up in value.
Yep. Well,
but yeah,
instead the plans aren't as planned.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff went sideways.
But Warner begins to recover.
Yes. We close out the year with the report from the 31st of December that Warner has risen for 4 straight days and ends the year just over $31 a share, as some see a chance to make money off a stock that dropped too much.
Yeah, you always see this with stocks, that they bounce back a little.
They bounce back a little. There's still more pain in store for Warner going forward over the next year or so. But yeah, so we see a slight bump back up at the end of the year, but this is still an absolute calamity for the shareholders and for the company, its ability to raise funds going forward. And yeah, so this is how we're going to close out our timeline for December. And now let's shift over. Let's look at the Coinop business news in our normal sources. And what's our first headline?
AMOA muted despite standouts.
With the entire Coinop industry in a slump, falling coin drop, increasing operator debt from buying machines on credit that never recouped their initial costs, and more pressure to only buy hits, the AMOA show, now just for everybody, AMOA, American Music Operators Association, these are it's the association for the people running Coinop machines, and it's their big show where they get to see all the new products for the new year, blah, 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 blah. If you're interested, we did a whole special episode on the AMOA show in 1980. Now, many great games were shown, including Joust, Qbert, Popeye, Time Pilot, and Pole Position. An increasing number of conversion kit manufacturers are offering their wares as a solution to the, quote, what to do with this game no one wants, unquote, dilemma, while others like Bally are betting on official mods.
So, a lot of good games presented on the show.
A lot of good games showed up at the show. The only problem is, of course, now everybody's a little wary of, well, it looks like a good game here, but what happens if I spend $3,000 on this machine and it doesn't make back its money? That has become the new big problem of everybody's very tentative. They have less capital to spend. It's getting harder and harder to find a new location, and if you do put a machine in an existing location, it has to earn better than the last machine that was in that location. Yeah, and it has to be innovative. And here, I mean, we're looking at very innovative product. I mean, Joust is just an insane concept. Qbert is an insane concept. Popeye, cartoon-like animation on the screen, and I use those terms very, very loosely because I will tell you, as a small child, I was a Popeye fanatic, and I thought that game looked like crap.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. No, it was so... I mean, sorry, but it just disappointed me so much. All I wanted to do is I put my quarter in, I wanted to run around as Popeye, pick up some spinach, and punch Bluto. That's all I wanted from that game. And instead it becomes picking up hearts that are dropped from above by olive oil and awkward positioning to go upstairs, and it just didn't work for me.
You later got your fix with the Game Boy game.
I haven't played that. That's something I should probably go back to.
It's not it's unremarkable. Let's say
okay.
But it's not bad. That's
like all the computer versions of Popeye, unremarkable. Okay. Now, a couple of interesting things do happen here. Bally is still, milking the Pac-Man license for all it's worth. They released Super Pac-Man. They released the pinball video game hybrid Baby Pac-Man. Remember we talked a few months ago about Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man, the wedding pinball game. Well, the child of that is the video game pinball hybrid Baby Pac-Man. We get an add-on board, which we've talked about here before already, but it's also shown at the show for regular Pac-Man machines called Pac-Man Plus, which changes the game up a little bit. So there's a lot of Pac-Man product from Bally, and some would say it's too much because, well, yeah, none of these games are going to go down in history as wonderful, great additions to the canon.
Yeah, Super Pac-Man rings a bell, but
it's
like
bad.
where you get really big, I think.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. It's not a good game.
I've never played it, so.
Yeah, you haven't missed anything. It was on the list. You could have played it for some
Yeah, I've seen it.
But E.T. was the better choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't miss E.T.
No. It's just, it was there. It was basically being handed to us. Maybe it'll be on the list again next month. So, Sega showed off an early version of a Laserdisc flight game with the promise that the simple purchase of an expensive base unit and relatively cheap new discs would mean years of profits. And remember, Sega is the guys who have been championing upgrade kits, conversion kits since the beginning. So, the idea of just popping a new Laserdisc and you got a new game would be an appealing idea to them. Now, there's also a rumor that Cinematronics is also working on a similar system. Obviously, that's going to become Dragon's Lair.
Oh, yeah.
That's coming. But, nothing official. Then we get 3D effects are also a big trend at the show. Subrock 3D, which we've talked about on the show already, was still getting praise for its technology, but it was disappointing everybody in the gameplay area. Stern Electronics has a game called Dark Planet, which merges red and black computer images onto a physical terrain model through mirrors in the cabinet.
So was this 3D graphics or was it 3D vision?
No. It's a very, very simple two-color display that they're using a mirror to project over, and then they have an actual physical, it's basically a plastic mold of what looks like a moon terrain with valleys and stuff, And so when you're looking at the game, you see the actual physical 3D mold of the terrain, and they're superimposing the computer graphics on top of that.
Well, sounds interesting.
It's interesting probably for 5 minutes, but you can never get a different terrain layout, basically.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So it's an interesting idea, but yeah, I mean it definitely falls in the category of novelty.
Yeah, that's the problem when you put that machine. I think 5 minutes is fine for an arcade game, but if you invest in such a system and put it down in your arcade, you want people to come back for it. And yeah, if it's just fun for only the initial 5 minutes, then it's not a profitable endeavor, probably.
No, and that's the problem with this one. Now, a more interesting use of 3D, the 3D gameplay, if you will. I mean, pole position is essentially 3D because you're always driving into the screen. I mean, it's 2D really, but okay. But another interesting one is Buck Rogers, which is using the sprite scaling techniques from Subrock 3D, and has you flying in a ship that you see from behind, and you can adjust the height of the ship at certain points, and you have to fly through gates and shoot at enemies coming at you. In many ways, it's a spiritual predecessor to
Space Harrier.
Space Harrier, yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, very much. Then finally, Taito also shows off a game called Frontline, which we also had in the list today. And this, I don't want to set down first because that's always it's always a failure if you try to set down a first. But it looks like it might be the first vertically scrolling little guy with a gun shooting stuff game. So it's like a proto Commando, only very, very primitive in many ways. Graphics, they haven't really figured out, how to get that little angled perspective down in the pixel art and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
But you are running around shooting at stuff as you scroll upward around the screen. So it's an interesting innovation. But again, it's this whole idea of the simple space shooter isn't going to do it anymore. You got to do something more innovative. And
did it do well?
Sure.
Frontline?
I don't think so. I honestly hadn't heard of it before this.
Me neither.
I don't know if it got any ports. That's a quick Moby Games question. Let's see. Frontline ports. Yes, no, maybe. Frontline was also a name for combat. That's not what we're looking for. Here. Oh yeah, it got ports. Oh, it got tons of ports. Atari 2600 port, ColecoVision port, FM7, MSX, NES, PC 6001, PC 88, Sharp MZ systems, Sharp X1 system. It got ports. So this is a big one, but it looks like it's, other than the 2600, most of these ports look like they are primarily Japanese systems. And the ColecoVision, of course.
Yeah, and maybe it's also quickly forgotten because there's better games which do the same thing later on.
Well, there's better games that do the same thing. This one also has the idea that you can jump into a tank and pilot the tank around. And when I saw that, I was thinking immediately of the old C64 game Fernandez Must Die. Feels very much like this one. But it's definitely an innovative product. It is showing the way of the future of the combat game. It's just something that had completely flown under my radar before this one, unfortunately. So, well,
maybe you can check it out later.
Yeah, maybe we can have it on a future 7 Minutes in Heaven. Okay, moving on.
Japan Amusement Machine Show muted.
The 20th Japan Amusement Machine Show in Tokyo was a muted affair as far as foreign attendees, with a decline of foreign visitors of at least 50%. The collapse of the Coinop market in Europe through a massive influx of game clones and pirated copies, making legitimate business on the continent all but impossible, and the downturn in the US hasn't helped things. A growing animosity seems to be developing between amusement machine makers and gambling device makers in Japan, with the gambling machine manufacturers calling for reform of Japan's anti-gambling laws.
So, the gambling was always illegal in Japan, I think?
Yes and no. Okay. Yes, technically it's illegal. But they've got the so-called metal machines. There's some really good. Alex Smith over at They Create Worlds did a great episode on this. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And so you're not gambling directly, but you'd put in the little metal slugs, you get the balls back.
Yeah, and go to another store.
And then you go to another store and then you get your prize. It's gambling, but so illegally speaking on the books, it's illegal. In practice, it is very much alive and kicking.
And that's why the manufacturers still are interested in making them.
Well, and this is the thing, that the purely amusement machines never made as much money as the gambling machines. But now that you have powerhouses like the Pac-Mans and the Space Invaders and so forth, the amusement machines are far more recognizable, and they don't want to be associated necessarily with the gambling machines. They used to sort of had to hide themselves because the gambling machines made more money, but now they can be like, hey, we're a legitimate thing of our own, and you guys shouldn't be sullying our nice show here. And the gambling guys are really pushing to try to change the laws so gambling machines become legitimate, apparently. And I don't think they succeed. It's my understanding that it's still not legal in Japan. But you can see this conflict where, the gambling machines never really had to fear the amusement machines, but if the amusement machines sort of kick them out of their legitimate show, then it becomes a problem. Yep. And so this is a bubbling up conflict, according to Playmeter magazine, that they noticed while they were at the show.
Okay, so there's some tension between those machine makers. Well, one is more in the gray zone and one is like legitimate. So maybe, it's a reason to be afraid of regular arcade games.
Just a little bit. Okay, but moving on.
Silco to bring home games to the arcades.
The Silco Corporation, the largest independent arcade and video game operator in the USA, has started Silco Video Game Licensing, or SVL. SVL will be a licensing and production company that will be licensing arcade games for home conversions, as well as licensing celebrities for use in home games. SVL president Tom Bonetti has already worked out a deal for Data Age to license the band Journey for a home game, and SVL will be working out a precedent-setting deal to get the license used in a Coinop game.
Wasn't that game like a dog, the Journey game?
It's kind of dumb, yes. The Atari 2600 game, definitely. The arcade game is kind of interesting just because it's using digitized images of the band members' heads and stuff. So you can sort of at least get some amusement factor out of that. But it's not great. But it is interesting that somebody's had the idea now of just being the middleman, if you will. To do the licensing, organize. It almost feels a little bit like, and I know it's not a 100% great analogy, but it's similar to what Electronic Arts is going to become. The company that sort of facilitates and brings, the idea or the IP together with the programmers and the designers and make sure that everything is working. It's not the same model. They're not becoming a publisher as such. But it is interesting to see that they're seeing this potential in licenses and being the person who can mediate between those worlds. And that is a legitimate business. I don't know how long these guys last. I don't know how much they actually get done, because this is the kind of thing that's not necessarily going to show up in the credits of the products. But I think that it is very, very cool to see that somebody's thinking already at the next stage of this industry and starting to treat it like other industries would.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue on. Pizza Time Theater opens 200th store.
Chuck E. Cheese has made it to Asia, with the Hong Kong store being its 200th location and third international location after Canada and Australia.
So, wow. So, Pizza Time Theater is the same as Chuck E. Cheese, or what?
Yeah. So, Pizza Time Theater is the official name. Chuck E. Cheese is the main character. They start putting Chuck E. Cheese on all the signs, and because that's the core of the advertising is that character, everybody just starts calling it Chuck E. Cheese. Like today, it's just called Chuck E. Cheese. But I don't know when the name change happens officially. But at this point, the official name of the locations is still Pizza Time Theater.
Oh, cool. But so it's now in Asia. So how did they go over there?
I have no idea how long this store lasts. I have no idea. I tried looking up some information about it, couldn't really find anything, and there were so many other stories that I just sort of moved on.
Because it's really like an American concept, I think.
It is a very American concept, but then, hey, so is McDonald's, and that's worked worldwide. Yeah. So Pizza Hut, also around the world. Kentucky Fried Chicken. So, I mean, there's really no reason why you can't export the concept, especially with video games being an international phenomenon.
Well, I think you couldn't have exported those pizzas to Italy, but.
Oh, I'm sure somebody would have eaten it. I'm sure of it. Now, interesting side notes here. The number of locations of Chuck E. Cheese, and I use the terms interchangeably, Chuck E. Cheese locations has doubled in just 9 months.
So,
this
wow.
is big.
Yeah.
Chuck E. Cheese is also capitalizing on the return to theaters because everybody's going back to the movies again with the promotion that gives away 10 tokens for every movie ticket handed in with a food purchase. So if you come in, yeah.
So if you have seen a movie, you can go to Chuck E. Cheese to grab some food and play some games.
Exactly. Yeah. So you come in, show your ticket, buy a pizza, and they give you 10 tokens for free. So it's $2.50. Not bad.
It's an interesting concept.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's because you want to attract them in. And you also have to remember, most of these locations in the U.S. are in strip malls, which means that there's often a movie theater nearby. I know the Chuck E. Cheese I used to go to, it's South Center. It's a shopping mall in Seattle. There was a movie theater. It was part of the whole shopping complex. So it would have made perfect sense. Go watch a movie, then after the movie, go get some pizza and play some games.
Yeah. Sounds like a good night out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Best thing you can do as a 6-year-old. Okay, now let's move on.
Okay, Coke adds games to vending machines.
In what appears to be a trial run, Coca-Cola has added small LCD games to some of its vending machines. If you buy a Coke, you get to play between 10 and 30 seconds of the game. 2 variants are available, one where you try to catch Coke cans thrown by a monkey on a tropical island, and the other where you have to spell the word Coke based on falling letters. The games would also be released as handheld devices to distributors as promotional items.
This sounds like good fun. It's a reason to buy it from a machine instead of the store.
Yeah, I mean it's just basically to attract you. Obviously, it would probably be annoying as hell if there's 2 people waiting in line to use the machine, and one of them is still playing the game for 10 seconds while you just want to get something to drink. Yeah.
I rarely see a line behind those machines, so
you have never stood you have never stood between classes at a Coke machine at a college. Trust me, that is not a fight you want to get into when everybody's desperate to get to the next class and they need caffeine to stay awake. No, sir. We are not fighting that fight.
and then play a game for 10 seconds.
Exactly.
Well,
somebody's going, tee, 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 pick up the monkey. It's like, just get your ass out of the way, dude. I need my Coke.
Well, still a fun idea. I would buy a Coke if they're still around, just to try it out.
Yeah, I'm guessing they probably did not survive. Now, I did put a link in. Handheldmuseum.com actually has at least one of the machines listed. There's a link to it in the show notes so you can see what the game looked like. It's just your standard little LCD game, but
yeah, just like a Game & Watch. Probably.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's continue on with Replay Editor goes Hardcore Reagan.
Oh, yes. With the slow wheels of bureaucracy finally catching up to Coinop, an increasing number of proposals to tax Coinop revenues are finding their way to implementation or at least debate. Coinop Trade Magazine Replay's editorial this month attacks such bureaucrats and suggests that if they want to, quote, kill the small businessman, end quote, they should, quote, move to Moscow.
Wow, this is pretty strange for a European to hear.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. If you were a European, let's say you were a person in England in the early 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, this is not an uncommon phrase. Oh. Or something similar would have been there. But yeah, so this is pure Reagan era, hardcore. They want to tax me. They want to take my hard-earned money. But it also speaks to the fact that the coin trade was making tons of money the last couple years, and now suddenly that money is no longer there. But the legislation, the rules that would tax them, took a couple years to develop. And so now that they finally coming to say, hey, we want a piece of that sweet, sweet coin drop, that sweet, sweet coin drop isn't there anymore.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, and it is kind of funny. But, yeah, so it just struck me as a very much telling of the times we live in, or they were living in at the time. That
because you
comment was there.
It's still weird. You get profits out of those machines. They'll count it up onto your business profits, and that get taxed. That's what I would think. But
well, and they do get taxed because it is income. But now we're talking about extra taxes being placed on them in addition. Where,
even more.
Yeah. So a lot of places, for example, won't. The state might have an income tax, but the local town might have specialty taxes on certain types of activities. Like you pay a higher tax rate if you're for a hotel stay than you would, let's say, to buy a chocolate bar.
Oh wow! I thought we had a difficult tax system, but apparently.
No. Okay, the United States is the most perfect example of inefficiency you have ever seen, because everything is broken down into little areas. So, for example, you might have a gas station on one side of the street where the gas is 10 cents cheaper than on the other side of the street. And it's not because the one company wants to charge more. It's because the street is the line between two different schools districts. And the school districts have voted to have an extra tax on gas to help pay for some repairs to the school.
So there's a lot of micromanagement.
There is an ungodly amount of micromanagement and waste. But, when you have it broken down that way, the local politicians suddenly have power that in a centralized, efficient system they would not.
Yeah.
And this is why they always talk about, states' rights and all this gobbledygook. It's basically just so that the local a-holes have power and have a job. And you could get rid of so much of the bureaucracy by just centralizing it.
But that's always the case. But then you have to move to Moscow.
Then you'd have to move to Moscow. How dare you? Yeah. So yeah, it's basically that's what's happening here. But okay, moving on.
Surgeon General warns against video games.
U.S. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop has publicly stated that the evidence that video games are harmful is growing, and although he had no scientific evidence, he was certain it would be forthcoming.
Okay, well, sure. Whatever you say.
Yeah, this gets attacked by everybody because it's so dumb, and the fact that he admitted that there was no evidence for his statement is just like, seriously? And then you're like, okay, it's a Reagan appointee. We understand. You're dumb.
He was a boomer before boomers were there.
Yeah, basically, if you're conservative, you're already you're a pre-programmed boomer. And Coop was a weird-looking character anyway, because he kind of looked like he was Amish. I remember seeing this guy as a kid. He was yeah. Now he does do something good while he's there. He's the guy who sort of starts this whole trend towards no smoking. So he's the one who really pushes for getting rid of smoking in public spaces and things like that. And he's also the guy who then pushes Reagan to finally acknowledge the AIDS epidemic.
Oh, that's a really good thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to say the guy was all bad. His heart was at least in the right place.
But he was also just saying a lot, probably.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that he went off on video games without having any studies, that's the dumb part. It's really dumb. But, oh well. Okay.
But there were good things about gaming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Pac-Man is keeping the kids off drugs.
Exactly. On September 14th, the Stockton United School District decided to reactivate several coin-operated games that had previously been installed at middle and high school campuses. The district had studied the effects of the games, which generated between $20 and $60 a week each, on the studying habits of the students, and found no significant effect, but the benefit that children 14 and under were less likely to come into contact with marijuana because they just didn't have any money left.
Oh, that wasn't the reason I was expecting. I thought it was like just they had something better to do, but it was just a money problem.
They did have something better to do with their money.
Yeah, that's true.
So, hey, why did I never start smoking? Because I needed to buy floppy disks for pirated games. All I got to say is, if you have a limited resource and you have the opportunity cost, you need to provide people a good alternative for where those limited resources should go, especially if they're capricious young people who are, when given resources, will waste them.
Yeah.
So at least then the school got some of that money. The kids weren't smoking dope. Everything's great or something.
But other than the next story, epileptic seizures caused by games.
You said that with way too much smile on your face.
But
okay.
Because is that ever?
Oh yes. Well, oh yeah. Well, and let's get to the story.
Yeah.
A Bahrainian newspaper has reported the findings of a British doctor concerning a growing number of epileptic seizures caused by sequences of flashing lights in some video games. People who otherwise have not previously suffered from epileptic seizures seem to be affected by such sequences in both coin-operated and home gaming systems.
Yeah, I thought that was debunked lately, but...
Well, no, you can. It's my understanding that it is still that there is that possibility, especially, I mean, if you're dealing with a system like the Atari 2600, where you're refreshing the screen line by line and stuff, you can get some really weird effects. Yeah, so you don't get epilepsy from it, but you already epileptic. The question is, can the video game activate the epileptic episode? And they can trigger the epileptic episode, but you won't suddenly develop a tendency for seizures. So what was happening here was people who normally didn't come into contact with anything that would have activated the epilepsy are suddenly having the epilepsy activated.
Yeah, there's still sometimes when I watch Twitch or something, people say, "Oh, there's a lot of flashing coming up, so maybe if you're epileptic, look away or something." So.
Yeah, exactly, and it's just the nature of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
But but it's interesting that it's happening this early, So this coming out of Creative Computing, and they're quoting the Bahrainian newspaper. And it's also an interesting study in here in how the news is getting around about this stuff, because this is the era before the internet. So something that one of the editors in Creative Computing had been traveling around the world to different shows and different places to gather reports for the magazine. And he happened to be in Bahrain when he sees this newspaper article talking about this British doctor. So this is why he knows about this report coming out of Britain, because it's being repeated in a Bahrainian newspaper. But that's his only way of getting this information from England. Whereas nowadays, you'd just go to the website of the British newspaper and you would see it.
Yeah.
But that's not an option at this point.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Atari Semiconductor Group founded.
Atari has hired Gary J. Summers, formerly Senior VP of Commodore International Semiconductor Division, to head a new centralized group within the company that will be in charge of developing and testing all semiconductors for Atari, including its Coinop, home computers, and game console business. They will still be farming out manufacturing to outside vendors, though.
Okay, so what's this about?
Okay, so if you look at all the machines that Atari is currently producing, they're producing some handheld devices, they're producing coin-operated games, they're producing the home computers, they're producing the game consoles. The chips for these, while they've designed some of the custom chips, like the Stella chipset for the 2600 and so forth, a lot of the stuff is still normal components from outside, and each of these three divisions so far is pretty much independent, doing their own things.
Okay.
So the idea here is to unite all three of the functions, this function of developing new chips and bringing it under one roof. So the same organization inside of Atari would be developing new chipsets for the Coinop, would also be developing new chipsets for the computers and new chipsets for consoles, as well as testing the stuff being manufactured by others for Atari to make sure that it's up to speed.
Okay, so it will be a more efficient operation.
More efficient, and also there's this eye, because the 5200 has a lot of similarities with the Atari 8-bit computers. This idea of, well, maybe what we put in the Coinop machine today might be good enough for the home computer in 2 years or 3 years, which might be good enough for the console in 2 or 3 years after that. So if you start creating this pipeline where we've developed these really cool chips that are so expensive in the first few years, they can only be used in Coinop, but we already own the technology, now we can reuse it in the computer, which is a more expensive device. So far, Commodore and TI will make sure that that's not really the case. We'll put it in the computer, and then after the computer, when it's really, really cheap, we throw it into a game console.
Yeah, that's interesting way of that's.
Yeah, it's a very smart way of doing it, especially since they're in these three very distinct tiers and price points and technological expectations.
Yeah, but unfortunately, if you see in the future, you will see that games also are really more similar to arcade games. Like, I think if you watch like in the 90s or something, Street Fighter, for example, on the Super Nintendo, is really similar to the arcade game, and I think they're growing together. It's not a 4-year leap. It's like maybe a 2-year leap or something.
Well, we're going to get to the point where the arcade hardware is actually, in most cases, inferior to what's in the consoles.
Yeah, but that's 2000s. Probably.
Yeah, well, that's only 20 years off from this.
Yeah,
but
only half my life.
Yeah. Minor technicality. But yeah, so no, I mean, obviously these windows are going to change and things will develop. But the idea of having, this expertise under one roof where, your designers are familiar with how to design for all three is also valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Whereas, if you have, your Intel designers may be great at CPUs, but may know nothing about graphics hardware. So now the question is, what happens if you have a division that has to do everything? They have to do sound, they have to do video, they have to do CPU, and whatever else may come. That's a fairly valuable resource if you can organize it and really create a pipeline. But then again, Atari is about to collapse, so it all doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is actually from December the 15th, this article, so that's interesting.
Playmeter comes out at this point twice a month, so this is for the December 15th. So this would have been announced somewhere in the first half of December.
Yeah, where Atari in the New York Times gets slaughtered.
So they probably put this press release out right before the adjustment. Yeah. Fun stuff.
Okay. Let's get to the financial stuff.
Oh, yeah. Now we're going to be looking at some
numbers.
The console makers, the computer makers, and the retailers. Let's look at some financials.
Financial records broken.
As financial reporting comes in for the pre-Christmas quarter, anyone involved with games seems to be breaking records. Commodore doubled revenue and profits for their quarter ending September 30th from $52 million in revenue in 1981 to $100 million in 1982, and from $7.5 million in profit in 81 to $15 million in profit. Coleco tops that with not only the best quarter in their history, but the quarter ending on September 30th saw revenues almost beat the entire prior fiscal year's revenues. At $165 million in revenue and $17.6 million in earnings, the quarter was a smash.
So this is actually third quarter, I think.
Yeah, this is all pre-Christmas. We're still talking 3 months before Christmas.
Yeah.
It's insane. But this gives you an idea. Number one, obviously it reminds us all these numbers are delayed because this is showing up in a December issue of a trade magazine. But what it's also telling us is how big this market for consoles and home computers has gotten and how quickly it's gotten there.
Yeah, so it looks like a bubble.
You could say it's a bubble. Everybody is buying this very expensive hardware. So you had all these homes that did not have a machine yet at the end of 1981 that are acquiring these machines as the year progresses.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah, that if something grows this fast, most of the time it's a sign that there's trouble on the way.
Well, I mean, also remember, especially in the case of Commodore, it's about buying the machine. Commodore isn't they're making a lot of money off of peripherals, but the software, which is going to be the thing that you're constantly buying, doesn't necessarily have to be bought every year again.
Yeah, that's true.
So, what happens when you hit a saturation point where everybody's got a home computer? These are going to be some issues that are going to come up. Now, Toys R Us sees a massive 42.6% increase in sales for its October 31st ending quarter, with much of the gain thanks to home computer and video game sales, but also due to increasing their market share in those areas where stores already exist, as existing stores sales rose by 25%.
So yeah, it looks like a good market to be in.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is all before Christmas. This is unprecedented for a toy company, a toy retailer, to be making so much money before Christmas.
So Toys R Us was selling home computers as well?
Oh yeah. They're selling home computers, they're selling game consoles. They went all in on the tech.
And at the time, how long did you wait until you refreshed or rebought a new system? Because
you have to remember that this is the point where we're for the first time we can start talking about console generations in a real sense. And I know the whole debate console generations, but the 5200 has just hit the market in very limited quantities. So you could almost argue, I know there was the Odyssey 1 and the Odyssey 2, but it's the first time where there's this massive group of people who have a console, and now there's the replacement console from the same manufacturer for a very large install base. And it's not backwards compatible. You're going to have to buy a whole bunch of new games, although most of the games they have released are old games, but this is something new.
But is it how much year is in between those two systems?
Well, the original one comes out in 77, and the new one is coming out in 82.
Oh well, that's
a 5-year console generation.
That's decent.
Yeah, you could also say that the ColecoVision is already a different generation from the 2600 and the Intellivision. It's so much more advanced as far as what it can do with sprites and everything else that it really does feel like a different generation of hardware. And you have a bunch of other games or game systems that are sort of in the periphery. You've got the Vectrex out there, which is a brand new one. So you might actually own two consoles at this point. You know, you don't necessarily have to get rid of the old one. This is also why everybody wants to have a 2600 add-on, so that, you know, you can still take advantage of the old games, the backward compatibility, if you will, because nobody really knows what a console generation transition looks like. We almost get a crash when the transition happens between NES and Super NES. Because the question was, well, will people actually upgrade? There were a lot of people and lots of news stories at the time that were like, why should my kid now have to buy a brand new one? I just spent hundreds of dollars on NES cartridges. What do you mean a Super NES? You know, they shouldn't just bring out a new one. It's fine as it is and stuff like this. So this idea that we just accept today, that people will go out and buy a new console every couple of years and buy a whole bunch of new games that are not compatible with the old ones. You have to go through that once before you even know if it's going to work. Yeah. So, and it's a new concept. It's not like, I moved from records. Well, I had the records I bought in 1935 still work on my record player in 1982.
Yeah, that's a way longer leap than those 5 years. Of every console refresh.
Exactly. The leap from VHS to Laserdisc never happens. The leap from VHS to DVD only happens once you have digital video recorders, when you can record the television shows. Most people still had a VCR and the DVD player simultaneously on the system because you still wanted to record television.
Yeah.
So this was unprecedented, and you needed to go through it, and unfortunately it's happening at the same time as the crash, so we actually don't find out if people are willing to do the console transition thing until we get to the NES Super Nintendo. Yeah. And of course in the computer area we're going to see this fairly quickly when people upgrade from a VIC-20 to a C64. Because the C64 is out at this point. The VIC-20 has just hit 1 million. They announced that last month, or we had it on the show last month. They've sold 1 million worldwide. And the C64 is going to come in, and most VIC users are going to upgrade to a C64. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah, let's move on.
Venture Vision enters VCS market.
Yes! Count up to the crash is not over despite the crash! We got more people jumping on board.
Good timing.
Yeah, yet another late contender enters the market. Venture Vision out of Texas has announced that they will publish Rescue Terra 1, a game by Apollo veteran Dan Oliver.
Yeah, so the greatest timing ever.
So you got this guy who leaves Games by Apollo. Who knows how much he knew about how bad it was, or how bad it was going, and he releases this game through Venture Vision. Now, Dan Oliver is interesting because he also later programs the DOS port of Night Trap, amongst other things.
Another great game.
Yeah, but he only releases one game for Venture Vision, which is the Rescue Terra 1. So yeah, but it
didn't do well.
I don't know how well it did. I don't know what is the goal of a company at this point. You know, how many units sold is a success? Would
That's
not
true.
be able to tell you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we got another one, and we're not done yet.
Zymac enters video game market.
Zymac, a subsidiary of Magnetic Tape International, has announced that they will begin to publish games for the Atari VCS and show off 8 games at the Winter CES.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Now, according to Moby Games, they actually get 7 games out. There are 7 games listed on Moby Games for these guys.
Oh, wow.
Not all of them have box art, so I don't know how many of them are just prototypes, how many of them actually made it to commercial release, but you know, they're out there. They're doing their thing too. Woohoo!
They probably produced a lot of bangers.
And none of them I think got anything remotely close to a good review. I mean, yeah, it's just crap.
Okay.
And now let's do something really innovative.
Mystery Disc brings Laserdisc gaming dream to life.
VidMax, a new company out of Cincinnati, is bringing Laserdisc gaming to the masses with its first interactive video disc game, Murder Anyone? The first of its Mystery Disc series. Using actual Broadway and off-Broadway talent, the player must solve a murder mystery through a total of 16 branching paths.
10 years since the release of Laserdisc.
This is the first commercially available game. Now, we've talked about Laserdisc games here on the show. Creative Computing published a program, a basic program, that with the right controller would jump you around on the Laserdisc and allow you to play a text adventure game enhanced through clips from the Laserdisc. And, of course, Sega's already shown off a demo of what you might be able to do, but this is the first one that actually just runs on a Laserdisc player with no computer required.
And, that's just skipping scenes to different points in it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just choose which scene to go to. So it's like, and I couldn't find a video version. If anybody out there knows where we can watch this on YouTube or some implementation of this or the sequel disc that came out called Many Roads to Murder, I want to see them. I found scans online. There's links in the show notes to scans of the cover artwork, but I haven't seen the discs, and I am totally I want to play this.
Yeah, it could be really easily with chapters in YouTube nowadays, so would be fun. But how long is this game?
I don't know. See, this is the thing. I know nothing about the actual game other than some screenshots that are out there and some very basic information.
Because how much video can Laserdisc hold? Maybe an hour or something? Or probably more.
Per side, it's about an hour.
Okay. Well, and there's 16 branching paths, so maybe you can play it. You can play it several times before the novelty wears off. Well, could be interesting. Well,
it could be interesting. I really think that, I mean, for the time and given the technical limitations they're dealing with, I need to see this. It's one of those things where this is a new experience that I have not had before. I want to have this experience.
Maybe we could ask the Video Game History Foundation or something.
They might have a copy of it someplace. Maybe somebody on Gaming Alexandria. Anybody listening to this, if you know where we can get it, send it to us. Okay, moving on. Enough with these game systems. Let's get to some computers.
Comdex shows both promise and problems of growing computer industry.
Comdex attracted 50,000 attendees, with the big draw being anything to do with IBM's PC. While many software makers are jumping on the system, like upstart Lotus with their multi-tool productivity package retailing at just under $500, taking in over $1 million in pre-orders, the standard had to be Compaq with their portable PC-compatible computer. Now that IBM has established a standard, no one will be able to compete with their own systems, says Compaq founder and CEO Rod Canlon.
Crazy that those the productivity packages are $500 at the time, and we're just using Google spreadsheets here. So Comdex is also what's Comdex?
Comdex is basically the big computer fair for the industry, where they show off all the new gizmos. It is this show. When did it? Comdex is still happening. Yeah. Comdex it ran until 2003. My bad. And so Comdex ran from 79 to 2003, and that was the show. That's where you went for everything.
So like CES or something.
Well, CES also exists at the same time, but that's for consumer products, so consumer electronics of all kinds, washing machines, dryers. Comdex is purely for computers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't have something similar nowadays, I think.
No, I think Sabit would have probably been the last big one that did anything like that. So now there's a Comdex Virtual. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page right now because I should have checked this ahead of time. But Comdex Virtual, I'm seeing here there was a Comdex in Greece in 2005. But yeah, so there's nothing really like it anymore.
So, but they announced the IBM PC, and yeah, that's a big one.
Well, it's not the IBM PC. That's already been out. The IBM PC is already out for over a year now. No, this is the first IBM PC compatible. Now, there's been a few compatible computers already that are software that they weren't 100% software compatible. So they used similar components. They could run MS-DOS, but you couldn't run anything that was really made to take advantage of the software configuration. Compaq has reverse engineered the BIOS, and they've released a pure PC compatible. It's also a luggable. So they've gone with the Osborne, not exactly Osborne. I'm making relative statements here. We'll probably talk more about the Compaq next month because there's no reviews of it yet. It just gets this brief little mention in the New York Times. So this is why all the big reports from the magazines on Comdex are coming in the next month or two. But yeah, the PC compatible is here. Compaq has broken the mold. They're going to get sued by IBM. It's going to be a whole thing. But basically, the age of the PC compatible is here. And yeah. And what Rod Canlon says is correct. There's really no point in having another system that isn't PC compatible. I hate to tell this to all the Mac users out there.
You see it nowadays that there's not much difference in computers.
No, there's no point. There's no point because you want to be able to take your software and put it on any machine.
Yeah.
You want to have the open upgradability. You don't want to have to wait for one central company to get their shit together and give you a system that's up to date. And yeah.
Somehow Apple survived this.
Apple survived it because they've convinced their little drones that we're cool. Yeah, no, you're not. Amiga was cool. You guys are just basically dorks. Okay. I'm saying
Speaking about Apple,
so much hate for that. Okay.
Speaking about something Apple.
One more thing before we get to that. Lotus, just some background on Lotus because you mentioned it with the productivity software.
Yeah.
It started by Mitch Kapler, and I think I'm pronouncing it right, who was a former programmer at VisiCorp. Okay, VisiCorp are the guys who did VisiCalc, who started the whole spreadsheet thing. His Lotus 123 will basically end up killing VisiCalc. So this is a guy who started out at VisiCorp. He knows what's going on inside, and he comes out with Lotus, which is the complete package that does all the different types of programs, and that's it's the Office package revolution, where nobody's just gonna buy a spreadsheet program or just a word processor anymore. You buy it as one productivity package.
Like Microsoft Office we know nowadays.
Exactly.
Okay. The GUIs are coming.
Yeah. At Comdex, VisiCorp showed off VisiOn, a graphical user interface for the IBM PC that used a mouse pointer. This innovative system appears to be the spearhead of a series of such mouse-driven systems, with Apple's Lisa on the near horizon.
So still that VisiCorp, which had is probably more innovative than the Lotus package, but
well, the VisiCorp guys have the head start with VisiCalc. They've got a lot of funding coming in, and we talked about this on the show last month or so. There's a lot of infighting going on inside of VisiCorp. And it's infighting that's going to lead to a lot of the key talent, like Mitch Kapler, leaving the company, and ultimately is going to damage their ability to stay on top of the competition.
Yeah, so they delayed their stuff. Probably.
But yeah, a lot of stuff is going to get delayed. A lot of stuff is going to get canceled or just not going to be as good as it needs to be. So key staff like Kapor leaving, they missed the summer of '83 launch date for VisiOn. So even though they're showing it here at the Comdex in December of '82, it's not going to make it out for summer of '83 when it was supposed to. It's going to get moved to December. And when it does come out in December of '83, the system requirements are going to be so high and that nobody can really use it, or it's going to have very limited usability. And this then leads, amongst other things, to a full meltdown inside the company, and VisiOn just gets canceled shortly after that. They basically just dump it. But it's going to be, I think it's the first graphical user interface for the IBM PC. There might be some other product in between, but at least it seems to be the first one out of the gate as far as public showing.
So I always understand that Apple was one of the first with the GUI, or with the mouse control or something. But
well, I mean, we've talked previously already how Xerox had a machine already 2 years before this.
Oh wow!
But it was a high-end workstation, and it cost a ton of money. Not a consumer thing. And the Lisa is going to have one, but the Lisa is going to be so slow because the processor in it isn't fast enough. There's not enough memory. Remember, we're still at the point where 64K of RAM is an immense amount of memory and very expensive.
Yeah.
So figuring out a way to get an 8-bit processor with that limited amount of RAM and building a video output chip that can handle things like all the icons of a GUI and the mouse movement and everything is not easy.
No.
getting all those elements together, and then you're still going to have to get the programmers together. And this is what we've been seeing with all the programmers for these upstart 2600 game makers. Just because you've got a programmer doesn't mean that they can immediately make a quality product. They need to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 games before they really get their speed. So if you look at like the programmers who left to form Activision, they were veterans of the 2600 at Atari. They had made a bunch of games that you would probably say were not that great, but they needed that experience to get to a Pitfall or a River Raid or whatever.
Mm.
And when you're making the first GUI, well, where do you find somebody with experience making GUI? They don't exist yet. They're going to have to do like 3 or 4 iterations of this before it's somewhat functional. But if you're launching a computer like the Lisa, the GUI's got to be built in. The first version is the final version because you're not necessarily loading it off of disk. It's got to be on a ROM chip.
And also, a GUI involves more of a team, I think. Like, I think older games and software could be made with one person. But I think, GUI is also graphical things, and there's a lot of new stuff going on. So probably it involves a bigger team as well. So you can have one great programmer, but that's not enough for something like this, I guess.
Well, and this is the thing. Yeah, you're going to need a large team. You're going to need a lot of expertise, a lot of different types of expertise. You're going to have to know what your video hardware is. So coordinating video hardware with the people designing directory structures, all of this stuff is hard. It's just straight up hard. And it's...
If you don't have your act together, then
if you don't have your act together, screw it. And even if you do have your act together, you're still going to need years of iteration.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't necessarily have years to iterate because you need to get a product out to sell because, you're not necessarily sitting on a large enough cushion. Yeah. And there's the pressure of, imagine you're Steve Jobs. You're going to Comdex 82. The Lisa, is supposed to be your big announcement, and here's VisiCorp saying, "Well, we got it running already on the IBM."
Yeah.
You're probably having a small meltdown because you're thinking, "I don't know when the Lisa is actually going to be able to ship. I have a ton of investment in this, but at the same time." I got to get the product has to get out, and there's a reason why he gets pulled off the Lisa project because he just keeps wanting to iterate. It's the reason the Macintosh is supposed to originally hit, and I think they had originally hoped internally at 82 as a launch date. It doesn't show up until 84.
Wow.
Because of all these continuous changes and iterations and all this other crap. So. There's a lot of issues going on there.
Okay, well.
Yeah, sorry. We're going off on it.
It's not nothing to do with games anymore, but.
But it gives an insight into how the technology is developing, how quickly stuff is moving, and at the same time, the market is dominated by stuff that isn't as innovative, but actually gets computing into people's hands.
Okay. Well, let's continue with IBM stories. IBM sues over trade secrets.
IBM has won a first round of suits coming from leaked trade secrets concerning its personal computer. 2 engineers and a marketing exec were fired and have now agreed to injunctions prohibiting them from doing any work related to the PC after they were caught on tape offering trade secrets to an IBM competitor. IBM has also worked with the FBI in sting operations against Hitachi and Mitsubishi, also related to the dissemination of trade secrets concerning the PC.
So were there trading secrets with Compaq, maybe?
Well, this is the thing. Compaq wins all those or survives because they did a clean room reverse engineering. but everybody else is just trying to get the information as quickly as possible so they can get to market. Now remember, the IBM PC is made up of off-the-shelf components with the exception of the BIOS. The BIOS is the one thing that's not off-the-shelf. So as soon as you can figure out the BIOS, then you can make a truly IBM-compatible machine. Okay. If they were using custom chips for the video or something, it would be a whole different ballgame.
Okay, well, let's continue on with IBM.
Yes.
IBM buys 12% of Intel.
In a bid to store up American chip manufacturing, IBM has bought a 12% stake in Intel, the supplier of its PC CPU chips. The deal will give Intel the funds it needs to expand its manufacturing and development infrastructure and help IBM avoid having to buy chips from Japanese manufacturers, which also compete with Big Blue in the area of computers.
Seems like a great investment.
It does. Obviously, Intel is also going to sell to anybody else who wants to make an IBM compatible. But the fact that they're doing this, and it is also a little bit reflective of the current debates happening in the year 2023 about, U.S. government investment in shoring up American chip production. Because IBM doesn't want to have to be buying chips from Hitachi and Mitsubishi, who are also themselves making computers. Next story. Getting into some more fun stuff now.
Games. Atari licenses Donkey Kong for home computers.
Atari has licensed Donkey Kong for home computers. This is part of a growing trend of console game makers releasing ports of games to the ever-increasing home computer market. While Atari's spokesperson says this is about bringing the most popular games to the Atari 8-bits because Coleco has the rights to the consoles, the home ports will go through Atari Soft, and they will actually release them on not just the Atari 8-bits, but systems like the Apple II and the C64.
So were the home conversions or the PC conversions any good?
Oh, the Commodore 64 one is very good. It's a little slow. It looks very much like it's a straight port from the Atari 8-bit. It's a little slow, but it has all the levels. It has all the details. I had a ton of fun playing it as a kid. So, yeah. And Atari Soft is going to do a ton of these ports. They're going to do Defender and Dig Dug and a bunch of games, and they're going to do them on a plethora of home computer systems.
Well, and they were better than the consoles, or?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you have to remember the consoles at the time that you're talking about are nowhere near the power of something like the C64.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, there's still games releasing on C64, and they still look great. So
exactly. Yeah, no. Defender on the C64, great conversion. Had a lot of fun with it. I mean, these are not arcade perfect by any means, but they're super fun games.
Let's continue to another form of gaming. Artworks advertises strip poker.
In a sign of the times, or something, Artworks has launched their first ads for Strip Poker, the program that would be a standard hidden away in floppy disk piles for a generation.
So how that's a game, I think, sort of.
It is a game. It's definitely a game. So it's Strip Poker. If you've never played it, the Artworks edition, the first version that they're advertising now is for the Atari 8-bits. It's going to get ported to everything. The ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, the Commodore 64, you name it. It's famously, there's data discs where you can change out the opponents.
Very important.
Very, very important. The artwork is, for the time, very, very good. I'm not going to say I didn't play the hell out of it. I learned how to play poker with this program. And even though it was quite old, it was like the standard bearer for this thing. Now, it's going to also be the launch point for tons of other strip poker games. Famously things like Samantha Fox Strip Poker later on and so forth. But this is the first one. Right now, it's a mail order according to the ad. I put a link to it in the show notes. It's a little of an embarrassing ad. It's only half a page. The other half of the page is for some other game that they're making. And it's got this guy, taking off his clothes in front of the screen. But it's quite amusing. And anybody who was a computer gamer in the 80s, I don't care if you admit to having played it, but we know you played it. So
the ad says, "Here's what mother never taught you about video games." Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Computer price wars continue.
The latest in the computer price war has Texas Instruments dropping the price of their TI 994A after mail-in rebate effective September 1st to just $199, which is the current, according to Creative Computing, street price of a VIC-20, after Commodore gave wholesale price drops of $20 to $40. Atari is countering with a 6 $10 coupons off of software packages for its 8-bit line of machines, and Magnavox has lowered its Odyssey 2 by $15 from its $199 list price.
So this hardware is getting older.
No, it is a ruinous price war where Jack Tramiel is not going to be undersold by Texas Instruments like he was with calculators, and he is going to ruin Texas Instruments now that he has his own chip manufacturing facility and has a better business model. And Texas Instruments is going to be forced out of the market very, very soon.
So, but the VIC-20 is going to be replaced soon, I think.
Well,
right?
The Commodore 64 is already launched.
Yeah, so...
But the VIC-20 is going for $199. The Commodore 64 is going for $595. It's completely different price different. Yeah. Now, within a year, the Commodore 64 is going to drop to about $300, and a year after that, it's going to be down to $200. But, and those are rough numbers. Don't quote me on those. But yeah, the VIC-20 is designed specifically to be this really low but yet relatively high quality machine that is just going to crush the market. That's why it's sold 1 million units within about a year. And it's just wiping Texas Instruments out.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is fun stuff right here. And the price war is only going to get worse as more people join.
Yeah. Mattel enters computer fray.
Mattel has announced 2 new home computer products: the Intellivision Entertainment Computer System, a revised version of the Intellivision keyboard component that was test marketed in 2 cities, and the Aquarius, a maximum of 52K computer with built-in Microsoft Basic and 16 color graphics that will retail for under $200.
Another cheap one, a new one. So
yeah.
Could be something. I never heard of Aquarius though, but
there's a reason why you haven't heard. So we're back to the chiclet keyboard, not the mechanical keyboard of the VIC-20. The VIC-20 only has 5K of RAM, and while the Aquarius has a maximum of 52K of RAM, it'll ship at $160 and only have 4K of RAM.
Oh.
And it's running on a Z80 processor, which also makes it, less standardized than the 6502 machines. Coming out in summer of '83, it was caught up in the home computer price wars, and Mattel ceased production within 4 months. They'd end up paying a company called Radofin, a Hong Kong company that designed the system, to take it back and take over the marketing rights.
Well, yeah, it's just dead in the water.
Yeah, well, we just talked about how Mattel just got hit on their stock, how their profits are way down because of the Intellivision. And this plan for the Aquarius came out before. The inside joke at Mattel was, Aquarius, the computer of the 70s today, or something like that. And it really is. There's no reason for this thing to exist. It's not even basically a toy. But yeah, so it's going to crash and burn really, really bad.
And more home market. IBM rumored to be entering home market. So.
Oh yeah. Now that their PC has taken off, IBM is rumored to be developing a system that will compete graphically with the VIC-20, have the power of the Apple II, and be upgradable to full PC compatibility. Will they be able to hit their $500 price point?
Probably not.
Oh hell no, it's IBM. So this rumor seems to be what becomes the PC Junior. It won't hit the 1983 launch date. It'll come out early in 84, so it's going to miss Christmas. And the price tag will be $1,300.
Oof, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. The PC Junior, there's tons of stuff we can talk about. It's not really PC compatible. It's got all these issues. The big legacy of the PC Junior is it gives us King's Quest.
Okay.
So what will become the point-and-click adventure game, or in this case, the 3D adventure game, it'll be the thing that saves Sierra after they lost a ton of money on the cartridge business. That is the legacy of the PC Junior, King's Quest.
Yeah, but it got ported to everything else.
Well, it's basically running on PC hardware, but just not quite. So getting it running on DOS is not hard, but IBM finances the creation of the software, so they have a ton of money to create a good engine, to create a lot of graphics, to have this high-end product that can show off what a PC can do in gaming, and that then sets Sierra on this. It's going to be a bust, but the idea that IBM is going to come for the home market after the personal computer market, that's going to light a fire under a couple of people's butts.
Okay. Commodore recalls Commodore 64s.
Exactly.
Or C64s, yeah.
C64s. Commodore has shipped over 10,000 of their new Commodore 64 machines in just the first 2 weeks, but production problems have led to the need for a ROM upgrade. Several hundred of the first machines were buggy and will require an update. Pent-up demand for the machine will lead to a backlog well into 1983 until production can catch up. The sister system, the Max, has also been delayed, and its initial launch price of $180 lowered to an unspecified low 100s price to remain competitive with the reduced price of the VIC-20.
Well, I never heard of this initial problems with the Commodore, and I'm amazed that they survived this, because normally there's a lot of backlash with these kinds of stuff.
Well, I mean, at this point in time, you have to think 10,000 units versus the million sold for the VIC-20. It's a relatively small initial batch, and the ROM problem didn't hit all 10,000. It was a relatively small number within that. So it's only several hundred of the machines were buggy and require the update.
And you don't have Twitter yet.
And you don't have Twitter yet and everything else. So if it's buggy, you take it back in, they fix it, that's it. It's a warranty thing. So, but the fact that they did have these initial issues, I just thought was interesting, especially for the numbers. 10,000 units shipped in the first 2 weeks. That's really a sign of how efficient the Commodore vertical integration and manufacturing setup is.
Okay. Sinclair dismantles U.S. operations.
Sinclair is giving up its U.S. mail order distribution operation and granting exclusive distribution rights to Timex. Up until now, Timex and Sinclair had both been marketing versions of the ZX81, but now that sales of Timex's version, the Timex 1000, have reached 75,000 units per month, as per a previous agreement, Sinclair will exit the market and leave further marketing up to Timex. American Express was also marketing a version of the machine, but that will also end. Amex is, quote, seriously talking with 6 firms, end quote, to find a replacement computer to market.
Yeah, I think Sinclair never did really well in North America, or?
No, not really. I mean, they were selling a lot of these super cheap Mazzetix 81 based machines, and they had this very low end section of the market. But the advent of the VIC-20 with its mechanical keyboard and everything kind of just kills that. Timex, which is also the company that is doing the manufacturing of Sinclair's machines in the UK, they're obviously very connected to the whole thing, but there's just so much competition in the North American market, and the consumer is not as financially depressed as the UK consumer is, so the price point is not as big of a deal.
Yeah, so it's like they're in a market which doesn't exist.
They're in a market that is less and less relevant. Yeah. Now, the fate of the Spectrum in North America is unclear, as Sinclair claims to have the rights to market it themselves, but Timex claims that this follow-up machine falls under their contractual rights as well. Now, the Spectrum, if you had put a decent keyboard on it, may have actually had more of a chance in North America, because graphically it could have competed without too much problem with the Apple II. The Z80 processor, if you sold it as a 48K version, you may have actually had a real competitor to the C64 even. But it's going to get such a weird, broken launch, and I don't know how much of that is affected here by this conflict between Timex and Sinclair. This is something that gets mentioned in the press. I don't know exactly what the ground for this was, or how deep this schism goes. But yeah, it's basically the Spectrum never really gets a shot in North America.
Another micro, Electron misses Christmas.
Acorn's low-cost Spectrum killer, the Electron, will not be hitting store shelves before Christmas. Estimated to go on sale at £150 with graphics similar to the BBC Micros, Acorn has said that they do not have enough stock of the machine's uncommitted logic array chips to launch in time for the holidays and don't want to only put out a trickle of product.
Which sounds like a good idea to not release something which isn't good. But
except for the fact that when it does release, they've missed the Christmas season. Remember what we were talking about earlier.
Are people buying computers at Christmas season? Yeah, maybe because they have like the end of the year money and stuff like that.
It's the big purchase of the year. And you're dealing with the UK. This is a UK machine. So the economy and what people have to spend is not that great anyway, especially at this point in history. And the fact is, once people have a machine in the home, they're going to stick with that machine for quite a while.
Yeah, so if you miss Christmas, they probably bought something else.
Yeah. If you've watched the movie Microman.
I did.
You remember that scene where the head of Acorn is standing in a warehouse and he's surrounded by boxed computers that can't be sold?
Yeah.
Those are Electrons.
But they sold it to the government, right? Or the schools or something like that?
No, those are the BBC Micros. Those are already being sold to the government. The schools are already buying the BBC Micro. The Electron was their attempt to get that cheaper home market that Sinclair is going after. And it becomes a major fiasco because they build these machines and then they can't sell them. Now, the fact that they're using an uncommitted logic array, so they're basically, using these, programmable chips in here as opposed to stock pieces like Sinclair and for the most part Commodore are doing, is it's a little bit hubris, I think, because Acorn has always prided itself on these design aspects. If they had just gone with a simpler device, it would have been a lot easier. But they don't get it out in time for Christmas. Without the Christmas season, they're screwed. And, So the Acorn Electron, another casualty on the path to home computer supremacy.
British computer makers move to block imports.
With the nascent British computer industry growing exponentially but still very fragile, the British Microcomputer Manufacturers Group, or BMMG, has asked the UK government to ban all imports of US and Japanese microcomputers for a period of 12 months. The only voice of opposition inside the group is Sinclair, which has put forward its own plan calling for less regulation, a lowering of the 17% tariff on the import of computer components that most of the UK manufacturers are dependent on to be equal to the 6 to 8% imposed on finished goods, like imported microcomputers. Diplomatic pressure to remove hidden UK export restrictions imposed by some foreign countries limiting UK exports, and making the UK government procurement process for new machines fairer for UK manufacturers. Of course, of all the UK manufacturers, Sinclair has the widest international presence, and an import ban would probably activate retaliation, which would in turn hurt their sales abroad.
Oh, that's a lot to digest. They try to protect their own business.
They're trying to say, hey, if you let the cheap VIC-20s, the cheap Japanese computers that are coming in here, we will not be able to build up this industry. And this is at the same time, also this month, Thatcher gives this speech in front of at a computer show, heralding, the new age that the UK can only have a future if it moves into high tech, because it's also a time when all the factories have closed, the mines are closing, blah, blah, blah. And, the entrepreneurial spirit will save us, and not, people getting handouts from the government. Well, this is why Sinclair is like, just take away the regulation. The fact that they had a 17% tariff on things like computer chips, but only a 6 to 8% tariff on importing completed computers is insane. It's stupid.
That's just
not.
It's
not smart. It's not smart. But Sinclair is making some very good points here. And any export restrictions on UK manufactured goods should also be negotiated down. But Sinclair has everything to win by making sure that there's no retaliation against UK exports by putting on a ban. Because if you ban imports, everybody else is immediately going to ban your exports.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want that because he's manufacturing his Sinclairs, his Spectrums especially now, in the UK for sale in all over Europe and hopefully elsewhere. And so he doesn't want that. But the smaller companies are all like, hey, Dragon 32s, we need to compete and we want to have a shot, and let's do it ourselves. So it's not going to happen as far as I can tell. I haven't seen any news stories yet that the government actually opposes any of this stuff. We'll see over the next few months if any parts of this actually do get turned into policy. But given the Thatcher government's attitude towards free markets and so forth, I seriously doubt that'll happen. We're going into the final rounds here. Just a few more stories. I know everybody at home is tired as we are. So,
well, they listen in portions, so we record it in one go. So.
Oh, screw you then. Okay, come on.
Or they are asleep. That's maybe.
It's a 4-hour podcast today. No, keep going.
The source adopts NCBMS standard.
Online service provider The Source is the first to adopt the National Computer-Based Message System standards for its electronic mail system, Source Mail. By doing so, users will be able to not just send messages to other Source customers, but to any other online service that has adopted the standard worldwide.
So you said this is the beginning of email.
This is, I mean, email has existed in various forms, blah, 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 blah. But this is really the beginning of commercially available standardized email. Yes.
Oh, that's
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, you're no longer stuck just sending emails to other people on the source. Now you could theoretically send them to somebody on CompuServe. So this begins to open up a whole new realm of possibilities.
A lot of new communication.
Exactly.
Oh. Okay. Well, Computerland opens 300 store.
Oh yeah, retail, baby, retail. So, Computerland, the world's largest computer specialty retail chain, keeps growing by leaps and bounds. It has opened its 300th store in Baton Rouge, its 301st in Panama, and plans are underway to open stores in Norway, Denmark, Finland, Spain, and Italy before 1983 is up. Sales are expected to exceed $400 million for 1982.
So this is a computer retailer.
Yeah, they're the big chain. We've talked about them over the last few months because they've been having a falling out with Apple. Apple wanted them to go exclusive, not sell from other manufacturers, or only if they were going to sell Apples, then they would have to be the only Apple retailer in a certain area. But now with the introduction of so many new machines, especially the IBM PC, Computerland has gotten a shot in the arm.
I'm thinking, maybe, did they also have stores in the Netherlands? It sounds familiar, but yeah, it's also a really generic name. So
it's an extremely generic name that somebody else probably used. The company's going to make it through, I believe, until the early 90s, but it doesn't really survive too well. It starts to contract pretty dramatically when computers just become available in more mainstream big box stores. When you don't need, that specialty person to talk to. But a lot of people got their start at Computerlands, like Richard Garriott was working in one, sold his first Acalibeth stuff. You go to your local Computerland and, hang your game in a baggie on the wall and they'd sell it for you. Yeah. So Computerland is extremely important in this early phase. But yeah, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it all the way to the end, so to speak.
Okay. W.H. Smith begins stocking the Speccy.
W.H. Smith began stocking 48K Sinclair Spectrums the second week in December at 65 locations in the UK. The machines had previously only been available by mail order from Sinclair themselves. The 16K version should be arriving just before Christmas.
W.H. Smith, what kind of store is that?
They're a newsstand, basically, of periodicals. Now, and our English listeners will know more about them, but they're like the famous place. If you watch, for example, Netflix's Bandersnatch, that interactive film where that's all about a game developer in the 80s in the UK. He goes into a W.H. Smith where they're selling records and all this other stuff, but also games. So W.H. Smith becomes a major player in the software retail business and the computer retail business. They've already been selling the ZX80 for a while and the ZX81. Now they're moving into the Speccy. They're going to end up selling most of the major home computers at some point.
Okay. Well, yeah. So they're extending their library of stuff.
Oh, definitely. But what it is you don't have to now have computer specialty stores. These are already littered across the UK, these stores. There's so many of them that by getting into them, you suddenly have mass market retail, very similar to what Jack Tramiel does when he gets the VIC-20 into Kmart in the United States. Suddenly, every town's got a Kmart. Every town has a VIC-20 for sale. Atari did it similarly with their 8-bit computers. But Jack Tramiel is going to take you to that next step. And that's when suddenly, buying a computer at a general all-purpose store doesn't feel weird anymore.
Interesting. Yeah. You don't see that nowadays. I think. Yeah, maybe in Walmart and stuff in US you see that, but
of course. Well,
and also, I think we
go to
have,
Aldi.
We have
Aldi.
Aldi.
You can buy a computer at Aldi. And the first computer Aldi ever sold, a VIC-20. That was their first. That was the first Aldi computer. Was the VIC-20. So no. This is why the idea that you can buy a computer in most major all-purpose retailers is starting here.
Okay. University begin to introduce computer requirements.
Some computer instruction-heavy schools have announced plans to require every student have a computer. Carnegie Mellon has gone so far as to announce that in the 1983-84 school year, each incoming freshman would have a network computer of their own. Some smaller schools are talking about computing as a necessity, and a plethora of courses on how to use home computers are popping up at community colleges around the USA.
Any idea what kind of computer they needed, or is it just a computer?
Well, and this is the thing. Different schools have different standards. Carnegie Mellon, their big plan won't quite work out. It leads to something known as the Andrew Project, which was fairly important in the evolution of computing, which creates what they called the 3M computer standard. And that was sort of like a minimum computer processing standard that people would then use for different measurements. And they do create this whole network system. So a lot of networking infrastructure gets developed there that later on gets adopted by other people. So one of the things that comes out of the Andrew Project is they have to work out the problem. How do we network different incompatible computers?
Yeah.
So, if we got an office full of IBM PCs and we got another office full of Apple IIs and we got some other guy who's got this computer, that computer, how do we work them all together? And that's going to be one of the big innovations that comes out of the Andrew Project, and it's born out of this computer requirement, if you will.
Yeah.
So the world that we have today, where everything we simply assume I'm going to be able to network my Raspberry Pi with my phone, with my PC, and with my annoying neighbor's Mac, is all just accepted. That starts to come out of these setups here.
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing, because it was a pain to connect computers. Even in the 90s, it was still a pain. So, yeah.
Exactly. And now our last story, and this one, not really, it's gaming related.
Mazes and Monsters airs.
On December 28th, 1982, Mazes and Monsters, the film adaptation of the anti-D&D novel by Rona Jaffe, hit the airwaves. The movie, starring Tom Hanks, is inspired by the tragic tale of James Dallas Egbert, the teen who hid out in steam tunnels in Michigan and later took his own life. The movie would help spur a massive anti-D&D campaign.
I never heard of this.
You can find it on streaming services. You can buy it on cheap DVDs. It's a movie about this group of college students who play Mazes and Monsters, not Dungeons and Dragons, Mazes and Monsters. And one of the kids, what?
Tom Hanks.
With Tom Hanks, it's his first starring role. And Tom Hanks plays this guy who is really deep into the game, but he's also slightly, I guess, schizophrenic or something, and starts to the barrier between his realization that the fantasy is not reality breaks down, and he runs off, and his friends then have to find him and then talk him off of the ledge of a building or something, and the dangers of getting lost in the fantasy. The book itself, really talks about the mental health issue, but it really comes off as, these games might be dangerous, and then gets explosively blown out of proportion by Baptist groups and religious groups looking for the new scapegoat. And So D&D becomes, the evil thing with witchers and demons and stuff. And
So
that's going to be a big part of the narrative for the next few years about the game.
Is it worth to watch this movie?
I highly recommend it just as a historical document to understand, because at the time, even though D&D was very, very popular, most people still didn't understand even the most basic concepts of it. So the way that the movie is portraying the game is interesting because it was sort of, for most people, the first time of seeing a demonstration of the game being played. You may have seen commercials for the game on television, but you didn't really get a feel for what happens in the game. And the way that they portray it is also not very accurate. But it's fun to, to watch it, this very ham-fisted approach to the game, and also to then understand the hysteria that comes out of it.
Okay, well, maybe I'll give it a watch.
Definitely. Okay, now, we're done. We got through it, everybody. Woohoo! So, last bit of business, intrepid co-host, what is the word of the episode?
I'll go with exhausted.
Exactly, that's a great one. So, it's been a long year of the crash. We've seen many companies come and go, and we still have one more December episode, even though we're recording this in January. But that doesn't matter because it's a historical podcast and everything's already old. So, everybody, remember, check out the show notes, check out the links, follow us on the Patreon and on the Twitters and the Mastodon and whatever else. Voucher, everybody needs to be checking out New Game, Old Flame.
Yes,
right?
Yes. That will be. We changed the concept a little. Normally, we brought only one game, and we talked about it, and now everyone brings a game. So that's change of concepts, and probably it will speed up the show a little, and we'll probably would be for the better. So
excellent. So, guys, links to that also in the show notes. As always, have fun.
Bye.